Hey everyone, Charlie Morgan here and welcome to Breaking Your Chains. In today's mindset video, we're going to be covering basically how to evolve yourself and to create an individual or a sense of self or identity that can easily accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish. We're going to be continuing to build on the knowledge that we gained in the last video with reference to the self, and we're basically going to be going through some more ideas and just want to give you a deeper understanding of how to really map out like who you are. So what we can do with that knowledge is basically clearly see you and clearly understand you and your current state and identity and sense of self, and then we can sort of map that out, make it conscious, and then we can proceed to actually build an evolved self or an evolving self that can easily accomplish the goal that you want to accomplish. So let's get started. This is a really important video. This one has taken me a very, very long time to put together. Lots of critical thinking has gone into this, and I'm really excited to share it with you. This is really what I've been doing for the last 5 years, breaking chains and constantly reinventing myself and becoming who can. So let's talk about how to do that and jump into the video. So here's what we're going to cover. So we're going to just start off with a really quick recap of the self. Then we're going to discuss oscillatory life cycles, flipping the floor, the root of limit, belief maps, mapping your current self, Darwin and Jung's ideological offspring, and then mapping your evolving self. So we've got quite a lot to cover, lots of sort of high-level psychological topics in here, but what we're also going to be doing is actually taking some action on today's video in terms of defining you and defining who you are and who you need to become to accomplish what you want. So let's get started with recapping the self. But before we jump into that, here's a quote from Warren Buffett, and this is a really cool quote. It basically says that, well, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. And what this basically means is that really, your habits and your actions and all of these unconscious things that you've been doing up until now, you've not really noticed you're doing them. And usually most people, if they do notice their habits and their ideas and their sense of self and stuff, it's usually way too late. It comes at a point where it's actually way too heavy. And you could probably replace the word, in fact, well, I have literally replaced the word, but you can replace the word habit with identity. The chains of identity are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. We say to kids as they're growing up that the world is your oyster and you can be anything you want. However, what happens as we progress to early adulthood, to late adulthood, is we form this identity and this strong sense of self that we use to basically navigate through the world, and we believe that we are who we are and that we can't change. And that is really, it's the chains of identity. As a child, the chains are quite light, right? You're not really anything as you're growing up, as you're growing into an adult. You can become anything you want. You can, set yourself in any trajectory. And at that point, there's nothing to break. You haven't put any chains on yourself as you're growing up. But as adults, we continuously shackle ourselves to ideas and opinions and perspectives and viewpoints without any real critical analysis. And then what we do is, we tie ourselves down and we shackle ourselves down and weigh ourselves down really with all of these beliefs and these self-opinions and images of ourselves and who we believe we are. We tie ourselves and shackle ourselves. And then we start setting goals that we can't accomplish while shackled to the post. So it's kind of like your identity is like, a big wooden post in the middle of a field, and basically you're just shackled to it. And until you're willing to let go of that thing and break your chains, you can't really go beyond the pillar. You'll just be, you can make some progress, but then the chain will just snap you back. And so we need to break these chains and we need to figure out how to escape. But this is only true for most people, right? This quote here, it's only really for people that, don't really understand how identity actually works. It's a pretty tragic thing. But this doesn't apply to everyone, because today's video is going to show you how to break free from your chains and unleash your potential. So we're going to start with a recap of what we learned yesterday. And it's a really quick one because I know you've just spent 2 hours or so listening to me talk about the self and everything. So I'll save you, a super long recap, but, we obviously answered the question in the last video of who are you? And we came to the conclusion that, you are a collection of beliefs, Really, that's all you are. People go through life asking like, who am I? Or I need to find myself. But really, they have to look no further than what they believe to be true. And, beliefs basically can be visualized with this sort of diagram, where we can take a topic, whether it's if we like cheese or how good we are at sales, and we have a green bucket and a red bucket. Every time we have a positive experience to do with the thing in question, we add a bit of water to the green bucket, which means that, we lean towards having a positive belief about it. And every time we have a negative experience about the thing, we lean towards the negative side, i.e. the red bucket begins to fill. Different experiences can have different amounts of quote unquote liquid, right? So if you have, if you, like, for example, you might be really, you might have a great belief about, I don't know, you might be fine with flying, like I love flying, but then one day your plane almost crashes, and then, that's a very negative experience. It's got a lot of emotion tied to it, there's a lot of intensity. So then you would tilt after that, and after the experience, your identity would shift. You'd go from someone who loves flying to someone who's terrified of it. And so it's possible, like, life will chuck shit at you, and then sometimes you'll react emotionally, and when you do, your experiences and self shifts. What we're trying to do here is take control of the drips, if that makes sense, and basically look at the beliefs that we have around our goal, like appointment booking, sales, business, mindset, like looking at these things. And all we're trying to do here is put more water in the green and less in the red. So if you take appointment booking, if you're struggling to generate appointments at the moment, there's a strong chance it's because you've had so many negative experiences with appointment booking. And what this has done is it's created a sense of self and a paradigm and a perspective of reality that says that appointment booking is hard, or at the same time, I'm not very good at appointment booking. And that's because you've been through bad courses, you've tried things that don't work. And so you've built this construed reality around appointment booking. What we're going to be doing, obviously through the program, is giving you modules that allow you to get better at appointment booking. But specifically to this, in this mastermind training, is we want to try and rewire that, because you're never going to act like as if appointment booking is easy if you believe it's hard. And really the only way to actually make it easy is to believe it's easy. So we need to sort of rebalance these scales and, consistently create these experiences in our minds, which we'll be walking through at the end of this sort of whole module, how to actually construct a reality and change your belief. So we have that. And then, we recall that really this is you, right? If we take a look at the screen here, there's just, thousands, if not hundreds or millions of these little scales. And every scale that you've ever sacked is basically you. And every experience you've ever had, every piece of information you've ever received and processed from your environment, every thought you've ever had, every memory you've ever replayed, any hallucination or imagination you've ever experienced, any dream you've had, every single thing or experience that you've processed is contributing to these scales, okay? Like everything that you've ever thought or done or experienced. And you have a scale for everything regarding who you think you are and what you think reality is, okay? Everything. And most people, well, they believe they are who they are and they can't change, right? They think in absolutes and forget that the world is their oyster, and they forget they can be anything. And science believes that neural plasticity and plasticity of identity stops at the age of 25. This is honestly completely bullshit. There's a common sort of theme or idea in science, neuroscience, that like people stop growing or people solidify, like who they are solidifies at the age of 25. They say this thing called neuroplasticity sort of stops and it becomes solid around that sort of mid-20 mark. I could not disagree more with that. If you think that at 25 your identity solidifies, then that's going to be it. But if you don't think it doesn't, then you'll take action to change it. And if people think that identity solidifies at the age of 25, can someone explain to me how Ray Kroc, like the founder of McDonald's, went from being an ice cream machine salesman at the age of like mid-50s to then like a multi-billion-dollar CEO of one of the largest companies in America by the age of like 65 or late early 70s? There's countless stories of people in their adulthood or later in life completely reinventing themselves and do not buy into the fact that you are who you are and you can't change. It really is one of the most tragic things that a human being can come to terms with. And there really is nothing to come to terms with at all unless you think there is. And the self does not exist. Who you are is just you, basically clinging on to a series of opinions, beliefs, and convictions you have about yourself and your place in the world. And really, most of these have no critical underpinning, right? Everything you have ever experienced, like all of your beliefs at the moment, they've been left up to chance, basically. No, it's not really chance because you've built them, but there's been no sort of direction, if that makes sense. You've never sort of tried to take your beliefs by the reins and sort of put the blinders on and start working on them. Instead, you've sort of, because you've believed that you can't change, you just believe that you're at the mercy of the world. And, you know, then we get all these stupid sayings like, oh, it's just down to luck, or, you know, you are who you are, or you take the hand that life has dealt you. But the reality is you can deal your own hand and life can go shove it. So you can change. And, you know, here's me. So here I am on the left, like, you know, 5-6 years ago. And then here I am on the right. Now, basically, as I've been recording this in Covent Garden, I'm not in Covent Garden, but that's where the picture was taken. The same person, right, in terms of the fact that similar sort of face, similar expression, like same, you know, physical body, but completely different person. The self is not the physical body, or the self is not the name. It's not a passport. It's not a, you know, it's not traditional manifests of identity or abstracts of identity like your driving license. You aren't your name. You are a collection of beliefs that you have about yourself and how you perceive yourself to basically like integrate with reality. And so I always thought that I was trying to bridge a gap in circumstance and situation. Like when I was here, I was like, I'm making nothing. I want to make 100 grand a month or 200 grand a month, right? But the reality is I was just trying to bridge a gap of identity. And as soon as I realized that, as soon as I was like, fuck, like where I am is a product of me. Me is a product of my experiences. And I previously have had no control over my experiences. I've just let life sort of come at me. As soon as I took control of those experiences and started to sort of filter through shit and like being a little bit more aware of what got in and what didn't, it became a lot easier to get what I wanted. So nowadays, if someone says something, or if I experience something or see something, I will challenge it. So like, you know, the other day, someone came to me and they were like, oh, Charlie, they were like, Facebook ads, they don't work anymore. And I was like, I need to be careful of that because like that's one person's opinion, which is probably bullshit. Do Facebook ads still work? I don't use them, so I'm not sure, but I'm not going to base my entire sense of reality and identity around what one person has said one time. And this is obviously what most people have done. One experience like becomes some sort of thought, which becomes like a really sort of shallow, like incohesive, weak belief. But then what starts to happen is we start to replay the experience and start to look for confirmation of the weak, shallow belief we have. We create this reinforcement cascade. It just loops and loops and loops. And then eventually you believe Facebook ads don't work because of one thing you read on Twitter when you were like, you know, in 2015. It's chaos. We don't achieve goals. We achieve identities, characters, and self-images. It's through the achievement of a new self that our goal manifests as a byproduct. And your identity and sense of self is the product. Your situation is the byproduct. So your goal, your reality, it's not, you shouldn't chase a goal. You shouldn't chase a reality. You should chase a character. You should become, like, you should create a sense of self or a character. It's kind of like, you know, basically acting, right? Except it's like real, right? You know, you've only got to read about stories of Jim Carrey to realize that if actors go too far, they can actually become the character temporarily until they're brought back. But in this instance, we're not acting, we're still ourselves, but our physical bodies and etc. etc. We have the same name. We're going to have lots of similar attributes. For example, the guy down here on the bottom doesn't like tomatoes. The guy here at the top still doesn't like tomatoes. The guy at the bottom can't draw. The guy at the top can draw. Right? I still have similar attributes from, 5 years ago, but it's the big paradigm shifts like sales, appointment booking, mindset, psychology, business acumen, hiring, like the real big needle movers that I focused on. And so if you want to achieve a new reality, you have to become someone that can. And really, you just achieve your goal by becoming he or she who can. And have you ever worked hard and stayed disciplined and built yourself up only to tear yourself down shortly after? This is the curse that most entrepreneurs live in, right? They live in this cycle of building and destroying their own efforts. So before we go into like yourself and really mapping out you and your beliefs and everything, and before we map you out and create an identity that would help you achieve a goal, there's a few more things we need to round off to polish off your understanding of the self. And one of the first ones that we're going to be covering in this video is what I'm about to describe as the oscillatory like nature of life. And really this sort of plagues most entrepreneurs and most people. It's this sort of cycle of hope and fear, or like building and destroying, where you go through periods of focus and discipline and productivity, only to then sort of take everything that you've just built and tear it apart by acting in the completely opposite way. It's like you've almost got two sides of yourself. One side is trying to build and create and basically build a future that it wants, and the other side is trying to sort of regress to the current, past that it's got, and you're sort of in the middle here. Have you ever experienced that before? I'm sure if you're watching this, you have, where you've gone through periods of huge growth and then only to, take that growth and just basically throw it on the fire. Understanding this cycle is basically the key to building what you want and making progress. And so before we go into the evolved self and your current self, we need to sort of map these out, because oscillatory life cycles basically plague everyone. And I've put these sort of two images here in the back, because this used to denote my circumstance, right? Where I'd have this part of myself that was like monk-like, and like I remember this when I was starting out as an entrepreneur, or even a year or so ago. I'd have this part of me that was completely focused and tranquil and calm and just able to get the work done, and everything seemed effortless when I was this person. But then I had this other part of me which was just as common and just as likely to rear its ugly head, where I would basically just, like, everything would be fucked. I'd fuck my sleep, I'd fuck my diet, I would completely stop working, like I'd sort of build myself up to a certain level, and then this person on the right would take over, and I'd sort of destroy it and tear it down. And this is the most painful thing. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. It's fucking horrible to watch yourself create something and then to watch yourself destroy it. It's almost better to have not created it in the fucking first place. And if you're living through this cycle and have been for a period of time, then we need to fix this, because really nothing's more painful than watching yourself build and watching yourself destroy what you've built. And it can manifest in many forms. And we're going to discuss this, and I'm actually going to reveal how I broke these cycles, because I managed to figure it out. Like it took me 3, 4, 5 years of lots of work and like critical inspection and thinking and psychologists and therapists and reading to suss this. So let's go into it. So have you ever made progress only to tear it all down? Probably, right? Where it feels like there's two versions of yourself. You've got the constructive version and the destructive version. When you watch a film and you see like the main character and it's maybe animated, and like the character on one shoulder has the devil, and on the other shoulder they've got the angel. They're both little mini figurines of the devil and the angel. And then the devil and the angel are sort of like telling the person like, you should do this. And then the angel's like, no, you should do this because this would be better. And then the devil's like, no, do this. You want to do this. And that person is then sort of like dragged between these two states. And part of them is the devil, part of them is the angel. And these two like forces are constantly bickering. And what happens with this person is they listen to the angel half the time, and half of their life is well lived, and they make progress. But then they listen to the devil half the time. And what that means is that really they don't make any progress at all, because any progress they build is destroyed. And so they end up like plateaued. And like it's fucking horrible, man. So entrepreneurs are at war with themselves. They cycle through two versions of themselves. One which by its nature builds them up to a point where they're behaving properly, acting on what needs to be acted on, doing the work and all that good stuff. The other version of them destroys all the progress they've made, decimating all the progress and setting them back to the start. And this average, what happens is the average version of self between these two states is the average mean state of the entrepreneur's existence. And this cyclical nature of progress naturally manifests in any individual chasing growth, regardless of where it may be. So until you become conscious of these patterns and what I'm going to walk you through later on how to break them, you will face these anywhere. So if you're trying to start, like, fuck business for a second, if you're trying to start going to the gym and you're trying to craft an identity and a sense of self that is healthy, and right now your current self is you're not very healthy. Well, what's going to happen is you create this new self that you want to become, but you've also got your current self. And so the new self, the evolving self, will manifest in terms of you going to the gym and eating healthy. But then the current self is like, no, that's not us. I don't want to do that. No, thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Future Self. I'm not going to take you to the gym today. We're not going to eat well today. In fact, we're going to do the complete opposite. And what usually happens with, like, you see this in like people who lose loads of weight really quickly, for example. I remember watching a TV show recently, or like a summary of a TV show, and I think it was like The Biggest Loser or something. It's like an American show about people that lose weight. It's kind of strange, but I was watching this thing about fasting. Anyway, unrelated, but what I found is people on The Biggest Loser, they would lose all the weight, right? They'd go from being like, I don't really know how heavy it is, but like 500, 600 pounds, and then they'd lose hundreds of pounds and become a skinny person. But then what would happen after that is, like, a year after, they just go back to putting all the weight back on. What happens there is, like, they addressed the effect, not the cause. So the cause of the true cause of the weight gain is the person's identity, because they see themselves as someone that's fat. And, like, what they did on The Biggest Loser is they addressed the effect of, like, you know, making people fast and then making them exercise and stuff, but they don't, liposuction is another example. Like, you're addressing the effect, not the cause. If they sat down with these people, and sure, they could help them lose all the weight, but then they would require therapy and stuff like that to sustain, like, a sense of identity that keeps the weight off. Just an interesting point, but my point there is they'd lose the weight and then they put it all back on, and then they'd lose it and put it all back on, and this sort of pattern oscillation happens everywhere. And this is really what it looks like. You've got these sort of like green trending up lines, and then you've got these red trending down lines. In the middle, you've got this sort of blue, which is really the average. And this what you're seeing on the screen here is basically the existence of anyone that's trying to do anything that basically challenges their current sense of reality and current self. When you set a goal, at the same time, you kind of set this intangible, weird potential future self that you'd need to become. So you start acting in that way to achieve the goal. But then usually, like, your current sense of self is so strong and so solidified, and your identity is just so rock hard, and you believe that you can't change. So you start building up, and then you drag it down, and then you start building up, and then you drag it down. And so, in the green line, this is where you're building and behaving and disciplined, and, you're keeping promises you made to yourself. And then what happens is you hit a peak, right? You sort of build yourself up to a certain point, or you stay disciplined for a certain amount of time, or you go to bed on time, or you eat right, you eat well, or you exercise well, or you meditate every day, or you tidy your room until it's perfectly. You basically behave in a certain way until you hit what we would call a peak. And then you hit this peak, and as soon as you hit the peak, you start destroying it. Like, all of your old behavior and standards, and you start breaking all your promises, and your discipline goes out the window, and then goodbye willpower, goodbye habits, everything just is broken down. And then what happens is you basically break it down until you hit a low, right? The lowest point. And this low eventually will become intolerable, right? And that you won't go past a certain low, right? That's a big thing. People don't go past what they cannot tolerate. But then what happens is you go to this low, and then you're like, okay, I need to really buck my ideas up. And then you repeat the cycle. So when you're in the green, this is the person that's building. This is when you feel good. When you're in the red, you're destroying, and it tends to not feel very good. And, like, the lower you are in the low, the more self-hatred and the more anger and the confusion. And the higher you are in the green, the more sort of satisfaction and pride and comfort, basically. So I discovered this fascinating oscillatory nature of my existence when I was starting out as an entrepreneur. I'd build myself up and take action on what I needed to do. I learned this from a mentor very early on, which was fortunate, which is why I want to teach it to you. And, I'd keep all my habits in check when I was building, and I'd reach a point and tear it down. And I thought initially that this was, like, completely out of control and just happened on autopilot. I thought, like, I had no sort of say in these cycles. And at the start, I believed I didn't have a say in how high or low things got. It was just agony, right? And I wouldn't really wish on anyone. But what happened is I started to notice something. And that was that the highs and the lows of my existence were actually predictable in their nature. And so what this would mean is, like, I'd reach the same level and I'd fall to the same low each time. So when I actually start, I'm going to show you some data later on here, but I'd actually start to see a pattern emerge. And like if I sort of mapped out my life over like, you know, a few weeks or a few months, I build up to a certain point and break down to a certain point, and then build back up to the point I built to before, and then break back down to the point I broke down to before. And very seldom would I really differentiate here. So it was very predictable in its nature. And I really started to sort of map these out and figure out like what was going on. So like, for example, I'm going to give you some examples in a second here, but like there would become a point where like I would make so much money and I'd be feeling pretty good about myself and I'd have a certain amount of clients. And then suddenly once I hit that point, I'd break it down to the point where I was signing, you know, only like a couple of clients. And then when I signed a couple of clients in a month, I'd be like, holy shit, this won't do. So I'd build it back up, and then I'd get the certain amount of clients I had before, and then I'd build it down. And this is the nature of a plateau. So if you've been stuck at a certain level, right, for however long, maybe you're stuck at 0, maybe you're stuck at 10 grand a month, maybe you're stuck at 100 grand a month, you know, wherever you are, if you've been basically making the same amount of money for a certain amount of time, then there's a very strong chance that these lines and these oscillations are happening. I remember when I was growing up, when I was like starting as an entrepreneur, I basically had like I would make decent money, but basically from when I started from like 18 to like 19, 20 as I was growing up, like I would have the same amount of money in my bank account. I'd have the same amount of I had like for a whole year, I think I had like £8,000 in savings. And I was going through the point where I was making like, way more money, but I started looking at it, why are my savings just not growing? And I realized like I would just save up to a certain point and then spend to a certain point and then save to a certain point and spend. And the sum average of that was 8,000. And I actually got all my bank statements together because I thought, well, there must be one of these fucking patterns going on here. And I noticed that I'd build it to like, I think it was like 16,000. And then I'd break it down and then like to, I don't know what, like 4 grand or something, and I'd save it back up to 16 and break it, and like the sum average was around 8 or 9 or 10 or something, but it was very predictable, and it happened for like 12 to 18 months, and it wasn't until I brought my attention to it that I was like, okay. So what happened is next time I got to like 16 and I started to think of like how I can spend the money, I was like, oh, I feel good, I've got this money, like this was one of those predictable things. I was like, okay, we're coming close to 16, we're 15 now, so what we're going to do is before we hit 16 we're going to take 10,000, and we're gonna go put it in a savings account or an ISA so I can't spend it. And then what I would do is I'd save it, and then like it would bring me back down to like 4 or 5, and then I'd be like, shit, I need to make more money. And then I just kept doing that and kept putting money away, getting away from this like threshold of 16 grand. And that's how I started to save, and I got my first 100 and then 200, and it started to scale from there. Now I can have more than 16 grand in a bank account without having to, worry or panic. But it's an interesting predictability. And, the same thing happened with the lows. I'd only break it down to a certain point, and my lows were very predictable as well. So the low that I reached in 1 month would be the same low that I reached the next month. I'd never really let it go beyond a certain point, and that point would be very predictable. And this happened for every area of my life I was trying to grow in, right? Financially, business-wise, fitness, health, appointment booked, sales call quality, like in terms of how good I was on sales calls. It's like service delivery, client retention, productivity, discipline, willpower, focus, consistency, the cleanliness of my house, the quality of my relationships and how much attention I gave to people, my diet, my sleep, like how often I was on my social media, like all of this, everything that I was trying to improve would oscillate. And so here are some examples. You can have 10,000 in savings and 5,000 in savings, right? And I would oscillate between these points. And there was another one with my fitness. So when I was sort of at my peak, at the best version of myself, I was, this is when I was like at the gym, like 5 days a week. I'd be running like 15K a week. I'd be training with full intensity. I'd be in eating all my food and getting my macros in. And I'd be having like long sort of good gym sessions and really like building my body up, and I'd put muscle on and I'd feel like full and big, and like I'd start to feel strong and be able to lift more and run faster. And, I started to basically create a new identity around fitness, and I was becoming like a bigger person and, more muscular. But then I'd reach a certain point where I'd feel a certain way or hit a certain weight in my body weight or a certain, amount of kg on my bench or squat. And then I would just basically stop working out altogether. Don't know why. I do know why now. It's pretty obvious. It was just my like who I was becoming was not in alignment with who I thought I was, and so my behaviors like relapsed. And I'd then bring it down, but I would never stop working out completely. I'd still do like 1 run a week, right? So it was like my identity was still like I'm still an exerciser. I'm still going to get some exercise in. I'm just too tired, or I'm too burned out. All these excuses I started to use, and the sum average of this would be just me, and I didn't really gain any weight or lose any weight or put any muscle on or gain or like lose any muscle. I sort of just stayed at the same weight with the same size, and like sure, when I was sort of at the top of my peak, I was bigger and I'd put muscle on and I was fitter, but then it would get dragged down to the point where I was actually unfit and losing muscle, and then I'd put it back up, and the average was just basically between the two. So here are some more examples. You can see on the screen here, diet. It's exactly the same situation with the gym, right? So these two go in hand very well. At my peak, like 3,000 calories a day, like good carbs, good proteins, good fats. I wouldn't drink coffee, no sugar, no fast food, no junk food, no snacks. I'd go to that extreme, and then I'd hit the peak, and that could be like how I felt, or like it could be, I don't know, my body had like an internal mechanism to tell or something. But then I'd break it down. I'd then start, going to like stop eating well, and at the lowest of the low would be when I'm going to McDonald's all the time, eating loads of snacks, no impulse control, carbs all over the place, chocolate, sugar, caffeine, you name it. And like I'd get to a certain point where I'd feel so shit that I was like, right, it's time to build back up, and then I'd start eating well again. Same thing with sleep, right? I'd go from 8 hours to 5 hours, and I'd go from like 3 hours of deep sleep to like 1 hour of deep sleep, and I could track this with an Oura ring. I've actually got some data to show you in a second, which will just prove this point back in 2017 very well. Same thing with sales. I'd go from being this sort of demon on the phone, right, being an absolute like literal god of sales with all of these objection handling techniques and convictions, and then I'd sign a certain amount of clients or close a certain amount of deals or hit a certain conversion rate or go above the conversion rate that I was used to, and then I'd pull it back down. So I'm like, this isn't me, which was just stupid. And we're not really I've got the luxury of hindsight here. Right now, you're probably starting to become aware of these patterns, and now you're like, holy shit, this is actually real. But my point is there's going to be loads of these that you're not aware of. And it could be like from how much outreach you do to like how often you eat fruit or something. It can literally be anything. And so like, I'd go from this strong conviction down to this, just lazy person on the phone. And I'd dip below a certain conversion rate and then pull myself back up. It was weird. Same with consistency in terms of my habits and stuff. You can see on the screen, I'd go from action taker to no action, basically, like the complete opposite of action, really. Mental health, would go from being clear and focused, and then I'd be terrified and anxious. And my environment, like everything at this point, at the top here, everything was clean and organized and ironed and paid off, and everything was in order. And then at the bottom, like I'd let it slip, and then basically everything would just go down and it'd be complete chaos. I remember this so well. Like my room where I worked at the time in my office would be immaculate, and then I'd just suddenly start doing stupid shit to make it dirty. I just couldn't seem to help it. I was just like, why am I doing this? Screen time, but this is an interesting one. I used to have data on this. I'd go from like, being in this monk-like state, 45 minutes a day, to then re-downloading Instagram. Like I used to do that. Like one of the key tells that I was about to enter this sort of like red zone was when I started to like re-download social media apps and stuff. Cause like, and then like I'd use them so much and then be like, fuck, I've spent so much time on these, and then delete them and then stop doing it. And then it would just cycle. It was fascinating. I could literally watch these unfold, and I even started gathering some data. So this is me from 2017. And here on the left, I've got meditation, right? So this is between October and September of 2017. And what we can see in, August and September, the 8th month is August on the left. And we can see that in August in 2017, I did 27 sessions of meditation for 540 minutes, basically every day. And then like what happened is I got through to September, and then I did 5 total sessions, right? And you can sort of see like halfway through September, I'm trying to sort of pick it back up, but I just can't. And then my average is just like 5. And then the same thing here is top right, sleep, right? So this is a primary example of discipline, like going to bed on time, right? Like if you can't go to bed on time, how the hell are you going to do anything, right? So like June, July and August in 2017 was good. Actually, you know, it's like September was okay as well. But then as soon as we hit October, I basically just fuck it all up. And so you'll notice like there's a bit of a trend here. Just after my meditation fucked in September, my sleep in October went as well. And then like it carried on in November, and then in December it got even worse. Like this is my average bedtime and my average wake up time. So I went from going to bed by 11 to then bed by like 2 a.m. basically. And you know, then I've got it in the bottom with reading as well. So this is the same, June, July, August, September. You know, I'm reading like, 20 to 30 days a month. My minutes there, my pages and my focus is there as well. And then like we get to October and then I read like 5 days and then I stop tracking it. I stopped doing it, and literally just November and December I just haven't read anything. Like I've got this data for basically every single year, for everything pretty much. All my habits, I track them all. Not so much now because I don't really have a problem doing them anymore, so I don't need to track them. They're kind of just ingrained. But this is a great way to see how this works. Like just try this for 30 days, like pick something that you want to do consistently, or something that like requires you to sort of change your identity slightly, and just kind of just watch. It's going to suck. You're going to experience the pain, but you can look at it and it's fascinating. I'm sort of observing this as if it's not even my data anymore, because the truth is that it's not my data. It's this person's data. It's Charlie Morgan from 2017. Like I'm not the same person. I have no affinity to the individual on the screen here in this data. This is not me. It used to be me, but it's not anymore. And I've been able to break my old cycles. And the first step to breaking them for yourself is to recognize your personal benchmarks. So I've got this resource for you, which is defining your benchmarks. What I want to do is basically print out some copies of the benchmarks, right? And you can do this. It's really, really important, because I'm going to give you this resource. It's basically the same thing that we've just walked through in my examples, but you can make a note of your own benchmarks, and you have to trust me, you have benchmarks, right? You definitely have a ceiling and a floor, right? Everything that you're trying to do, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to grow a business, what that means is that you're trying to grow yourself, because personal growth is basically business growth, just manifested in financial form. And so you've definitely got these benchmarks. And if you think, no, I haven't got any benchmarks, then, well, what that would mean is that you have no plateaus in life. So if you've been making a similar amount of money, or if you've got the same amount of money saved, or if you look around and your office is a certain state all the time, or if you know that you're going to bed too late on Saturdays, or if you know that you keep going out drinking when you shouldn't, you've got benchmarks, you have standards, you have everything, right, related to this. So what I want you to do, in the resources section, there will actually be a PDF here. Okay, looks like this. I'm going to flip it here. And what I want you to do is just go and print this out. It's just a simple sort of sheet. It should just print through on a page nicely. Go ahead and print it out. And all you need to do here, just print. I mean, you can print out as many of these things as you want. Like the more the merrier, really, because the more you become aware of this stuff, the easier it is to recognize these patterns elsewhere. Because like I can now notice patterns in all sorts of shit, like everything, literally down to like every little detail in my life, like how often like I'm listening to music, and like how often I spend like watching certain films and stuff. Like you just become more aware of your consciousness. And so print this out and just start mapping yourself. So it could be the oscillation of my bedtime, or the oscillation of the cleanliness of my apartment, or the oscillation of how angry I get in my spouse, right? Or anything you've got that you're trying to improve, you're going to oscillate between. So just print this out and list the predictable high and list the predictable low. And if you want to, you can also add the average, but you can sort of get the average here. But trust me, you've got these, okay? So, just pause the video, go and grab a printer, or if you haven't got a printer, then just go ahead and just sort of draw this out, right? You can it's probably a bit easier to do that, to be honest. Just go ahead and draw it out and start logging this stuff, because breaking this pattern is the most rewarding and satisfying thing that I've ever done. Above anything, any amount of money I've ever made, or any business success I've ever had, like this is the most fun thing to do. To recognize a pattern and a plateau, and then just think, I'm not tolerating that. Fuck it, I'm gonna break through it. And to do that, I found nothing personally more rewarding. But you cannot break a chain that you don't understand. right? Or that you don't know is there. Most people, I say breaking your chains, but most people don't even know they're chained, right? This pattern, this plateau is a chain, and it's weighing you down, and it's tying your hands and stopping you from trying to do things that you want to do. And like most people don't see it, and most people don't know their hands are tied, so they're not even aware that their hands can be untied. They don't know what reality would be like if their hands are untied, because they don't know their hands are tied, right? They just accept reality for what it is, which is stupid. So pause the video, go ahead, draw it out on some paper and stuff, and just map out your oscillations, because you can just see yourself, basically. It gets very predictable. And, just you may not have the luxury of data like this, but I can tell you this is how I lived for like a couple of years. Like, I'd go through these months or these quarters even, where I'd be good and I'd be in bed by 11, and then I'd go through like the next quarter where I'd be going to bed on average at like 2 a.m. And then like some days on Saturdays I'd go to bed like 4 a.m. And then I'd be like in bed by like 9 p.m. on Mondays, and then it would be 4 a.m. and everything, right? Map it out, log it, and let's move on. And understanding the cycle was the key to breaking it. And I won't lie, it took me long time to break these things. The quicker you can learn to break these patterns, the faster you can make progress. But let's explore the nature of oscillation, and so we want to figure out how to break it. So we've got basically your average state, okay, which is this blue line. And you are your averages, right? That's the key thing to understand here, is basically the oscillations and the sort of cycles that you live through are a result of your beliefs, right, and how you perceive your identity and everything, which we'll be talking about later. However, like, the result of the oscillation is an average. And so over time, these oscillations, they regress to a mean average, a mean amount, or, it may not be a quantifiable numerical figure, but you become an average over time, right, in terms of how much you weigh, or how far you can run, or how much music you listen to, or how often you go out for dinner, right? Everything is an average. And what we have up here is your personal ceiling. So I refer to this as sort of like the top or the peak, but I'm actually going to name this the ceiling, right? And your personal ceiling is the best version of yourself that you can currently achieve in accordance with how good you think you can be, right? So simply put, going beyond this point would mean behaving in a way that accomplishes a reality incongruent with a part of your identity or core belief. So your ceiling is your peak. When you're at your ceiling is when you've got your most amount of money saved, you're in your most disciplined state, you've got more focus than, as I say ever before, but you're at your height, you're at the best ability to focus, you're reading the most books, you're doing the best things, you're taking the best actions, you're doing everything that you should do. And you build this ceiling and you hit this ceiling. It's basically like you bang your head on it and then you sort of fall down and break your legs, basically, because most people, they have a ceiling and it's there, and it's this sort of like, it's a self-image problem, because going beyond the ceiling would basically mean challenging who you are, right? So we build ourselves up to think we're disciplined, and then we've obviously got this downside, this past sense of self that's like, actually, we're not going to let this go much further because, well, that's not who we are, so we're just going to start dragging it down. And the ceiling manifests in many ways, right, in different areas of your life. And so then what we have over here is the personal floor, right? So as opposed to calling it like a trough, we're going to refer to it as a floor, okay? And your personal floor is the worst version of yourself that you can accept, right? This is your hygiene standard, and you never break it. Right? So just like you never go past your ceilings, you never break your standards. This is a big thing. People, humans do not break their standards, right? Going beyond your personal floor would mean tolerating a situation or reality that's simply intolerable. And intolerable to you is basically defined as like manifesting a reality that is so out of alignment with the worst version of yourself or the past version of yourself. So you have to understand like who you are right now and who you need to be. Like, you're never going to dip below who you are right now. So really, the secret of this whole thing is just basically recreating who you are right now in a certain way that doesn't, like, conflict, if that makes sense. But you're never going to go below this point. Now, you can. It's actually possible to dip below that, but it's very uncommon. But the chances are is you don't enjoy where you are right now. So, dipping below this would mean manifesting a reality out of alignment with your sense of self or belief system. So you've got this sort of personal ceiling, which is the best version of yourself that you believe you can be. And anything beyond that would be out of alignment with that. And that is why we start to drag it down. And then we've got the worst version of ourselves that we can accept. And anything beyond that, well, we simply wouldn't accept and we'd start to rebuild it. And examples of your personal flaw is like how messy you can tolerate your office, or like one for me was like how late it would get at night before I think, right, I should actually sleep now, right? So like my flaw would be like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. I'd be like, as soon as it got past like 3:30 at night, if I was like up late watching YouTube or doing something stupid, I'd be like, okay, it's time to go to bed. Or it's kind of like how much money you can spend in one weekend and then think, shit, no more spending for me. So like maybe you go out and then the next day you see you spent like £500 at a club for no reason, and then you spend like another £100 on something stupid, and then you're like, oh my God, I spent 600 quid. Like I can't spend more than that in a weekend. God no. Like, and then you just would not, like, it's almost like there's an iron lock on your bank account. Like no amount of money can come out of that thing, no matter what, until you've rebuilt it. Right? And then like you rebuild it to spending nothing, and then you do the same thing next weekend. It's kind of crazy how this stuff works. So in other words, you have beliefs both about yourself and reality that not only limit how far you can climb, but limit how far you can fall. And these beliefs become your ceiling and your floor. And your ceiling is you on your best behavior, and your floor is you on your worst behavior. And like the key here is so it's your best and your worst. And if we remember, your current best and your current worst does not have to stay static and the same. So we can change this. And so, between, the floor and the ceiling, we're building up and taking action and feeling good and facing the pain and doing the work. And then what happens is we hit the ceiling. And we don't go above it, God no. But we feel accomplished. We feel proud. You feel like you've hit a limit, right? So I used to blame burnout, right? I'd be like building myself up, and then I'd think, oh, I've burned out. And that was like the most common justification for my past sense of self to start destroying what I've built. But what happens at this point is motivation and determination turns into pride and comfort. And then the comfort turns into apathy, and then justification for destruction. So it's kind of like you need to build something so you can destroy it, if that makes sense. Which is kind of backwards, but this is honestly how like most people operate and work. Is it's like there's the becoming self and there's the being self. The becoming self is the yang, right? It's the molding the potential, and the being self is the yin, which is the sort of raw energy that you can use to create. But what happens is you have this sort of energy to create, and you start building and building and building. And it's kind of like you're just building it so you can destroy it, and then you destroy it so you can build it. Because otherwise, what else would be the point in life? But that's how most people live. It's an unconscious manifestation of a complete lack of integration, and we're going to discuss it. And then, here you take no action, or more commonly, like you take the opposite action, right? So, like, I'm not just saying like you go from making no money, you go from making loads of money to making no money. It's like you go from making loads of money to spending loads of money, for example, or you go from tidying up to purposefully making your room messy, or you go from being really focused to purposefully procrastinating, right? You don't just sort of like, plateaus aren't just straight lines, they're wavelengths, right? And the straight line would denote the average, but we sort of go up and down over the average. And then what happens here is you hit rock bottom as far as your standards are concerned, and you start getting angry or desperate, and then you feel motivated to rebuild, and you start taking all this action. And I'm just making sure that this is, you can see that there. This is the, the sort of point at the bottom. And that's really like how it works, is you just go from one extreme to the other. It really sucks. It's very painful. And honestly, like the quicker that we can sort of break through these things and start destroying them down, in a productive way, it's good. So here's where it gets interesting, right? Because if you start to track your emotions and the pain of this oscillation, then you can actually start to see like the driving forces and direct causes and effects behind these things. So if I just come out here and, I'll show you on the slides actually. But if you start tracking this, what we can see is the emotions. So at the top of this, right, you basically start to experience pride, and you feel like you're unstoppable. You feel this satisfaction, and you feel this gratification, this triumph, and this self-admiration. As you're building up, just before you hit your ceiling, you're not in too much pain either, because you're feeling so good that like it sort of offsets the pain. So you're only like in a 2 out of 10 pain state. But then what happens after you hit your ceiling is you become apathetic. You become comfortable, content. You start to experience some lethargy, boredom, confident. You're still confident here. You're feeling calm. You're sort of like, yeah, I've done it. I'm this person now. Great. But then what happens pretty quickly is there's no pain, right? So you're not in any pain here because, well, you're bouncing back from your ceiling, and usually you're sort of relaxing at this point or taking the time off that you quote unquote feel you deserve, right? And then you sort of scale it down and you're in pain here. But like what happens is just before you hit your floor, you really start to really hate yourself, right? At least I did. This was sort of like a big thing where like I would be really angry and I'd be in this state of like self-hatred. I'd feel this sort of sense of disgust for myself. I was all confused and baffled and anxious and irritated, and I'd feel shame and embarrassment and guilt. Like, why have I done this? Why have I broken it all down? And the pain level here is like above a 10. This is like 11 out of 10. This is like fucking awful, right? All these emotions start to bubble up here. And then once you hit rock bottom, or once you hit that standard or that floor, you start to feel determined and motivated, and you've got this sense of redemption and this boldness and this tenacity and this grit and this focus. And, you know, you'll say things to yourself like, enough is enough, or this is the time, or that's it, I'm not tolerating this anymore. And you're still in serious pain here, but it's productive pain. The pain is no longer sort of like getting you down, it's actually forcing you up, if that makes sense. And then you repeat the cycle, right? Your emotional reaction to these different stages may be different to mine, but this is how it played out for me, right? And I felt as though I was at the mercy of this cycle, right? I lived with this really for a good 3 or 4 years, even when my business was doing six figures. I don't really have this too much anymore. Now I'm at multi-7 figures. The key to going from, like, in case you're wondering, from multi-6 figures to multi-7 figures, really, well, even 7 figures, but it's kind of just breaking this cycle and controlling your emotions and being able to just keep working when you think you've done enough, if that makes sense. But this is the cycle. I'd go from anger to drive to pride and comfort. And it was like I had two sides to myself. I had the constructive Charlie and the lazy Charlie. And it would take over and I'd build something cool and then I'd come in and tear it down. But then one day I managed to actually crack it. This is where it gets really exciting, because there was actually a day and a time where I realized, like, I thought about this stuff and I researched it, and I spent like years and years trying to think about how to break these things. And eventually it kind of just clicked, and it was the best day of my life, basically. It was the day I started to pay attention to pain, right? And I sort of mapped this out, and I realized that really the key here was the pain. The driving force was the pain. So when I was in the most pain, I was basically building the most and doing the most work. And when I was in the least pain, I was basically doing the least and destroying things. So like, but what was weird is, like, I kind of had to go through the pain to then have none, to then blow it up so I could experience the pain again. It was kind of like I had this Stockholm syndrome for agony, and I was constantly cycling through it. And pain was truly the key to all of this. When I was in the most pain, I took the most action. And the pain came from when I got close to my floor. So I realized that, like, what I wanted to try and do was figure out how I could create pain and stay in that pain. And that sounds like a horrible thing to do, right? And it sounds horrible, but when you perceive pain in a different way, in a completely different paradigm to other people, it's actually the best thing you can do. So I had to figure out how to basically create 100% pain, 75% pain states and stay in them. Because for as long as I was in pain, working away from something and trying to escape a situation, which is why pain exists, then I would consistently try to do it. So I had to figure out how to basically stay at my floor, but not, if that makes sense. So what I'm not saying, you don't want to experience self-hatred and anger. The key here is the 75%, right? This is where you feel determined and motivated and focused and gritty, and enough is enough is kind of the phrase of that in this sort of second stage on the right here. You're in pain, but it's not agony, and it's not manifesting so hard that you start hating yourself and beating yourself up about stupid things. But if you can stay in a painful state, but balance it out with enough positive emotion and optimism to keep driving yourself forward, then what happens is you keep building and building and building. But then what happens is eventually all of those emotions and that pain manifests a reality that you feel comfortable with and satisfied with. That's when pride takes over. Pride replaces pain. Then because there's no pain, there's no reason to build, because you're not escaping anything, right? And then you start blowing it all up and firing down until you're down to comfort and then anger. So what I had to do was keep myself at my floor, but make my floor my new ceiling. I'm going to explain how to do this in a second, but might sound really complicated for now. But I call it flipping the floor. And as soon as I figured out how to do this, I was like, oh my fucking God, this makes so much sense. Because if the floor is really between the floor and the ceiling, from going from sort of bottom to top, is where you're in your most productive. What you just want to try and do is eliminate the ceiling or create the floor and make it the ceiling. I'll explain how this works in just a second. I know that sounds really confusing and weird. I always thought it was about the ceiling. I always thought it was about how high I could build myself up. And I always thought it was about, keeping going on and going on. I thought like if I want to keep trending upwards and making progress, I had to raise the ceiling. But what I realized is that if I wanted to have my oscillation truly trend upwards and truly make exponential progress, I had to raise the floor, not the ceiling. So the floor is your standards. It's the minimum thing you can accept. So what I had to do was figure out how to basically make my dream self my standard self, to the point where like I had this vision of who I wanted to be, but I had to basically perceive that as like, I will not tolerate anything less than that. Anything that is not that creates 100% pain and anger. And then like what happens is you hit that self, and then that becomes your new sense of reality, which becomes your new sort of floor. You can't dip below that. You're still going to be in pain and continuing to grow to another level. But I always thought it was about the ceiling. I was like, yeah, it's all about the positive side and like building myself up and growing myself. But I realized like, instead of focusing on like my dream self, I just had to focus on like what I accepted as a standard, right? So I'll explain how this works in a second. So here's an example, right, of raising this floor. So basically, if I raised the ceiling without raising the floor, I'd have a longer distance to fall, is what I realized. So like with examples with savings, right? So let's say you raise your ceiling from someone who makes 2K a month to someone who makes 100K a month with the goal of becoming a millionaire in assets and cash. So this is an oscillation for someone trying to save money. And like, obviously the key to saving money is to make it and then not spend it, right? But what I realized is like, you can increase how much you save infinitely, right? How much you make, you can just continuously increase like your income, right? If you just learn more skills and keep acquiring more and more and more and more, you can do that. But it doesn't really matter, because if you don't address the downside, then you're going to keep regulating it back down. So I can like, you can make like, you can go from making $2,000 a month to $100,000 a month. But if the downside of you is still spending, like 99% of what you make, then you're still in net position zero, especially if you're spending it on stupid stuff and you're not sort of investing it. Like same thing with fitness. It doesn't matter how much you lose if you put it all back on. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep. So it's never about the up. It's all about the down. So I was so backwards with this because I was always focusing on what I could do to raise my ceiling and raise that standard of like, going to bed earlier. But then I realized like the secret was just basically to raise the floor. Because I was like, I'm going to start getting up at like 5, because bedtime was one, for example, like what time I go to bed, what time I wake up, as a manifest of my discipline. And I was like, instead of like the downside was I'd always on weekends go to bed at like 3 a.m, and then like by the next week my hormones were fucked, right? So my downside was going to bed at 3 a.m. on like, Fridays and Saturdays. And then I was like so focused on trying to like go to bed at like 9 p.m. through the week and like, try and make my sort of like, my ceiling as high as possible. And instead of like that, what I should have done is I should have said, right, instead of trying to focus on going to bed earlier, I should just focus on not going to bed later. And so it's by inverting that relationship that you actually correct yourself and create what you want. And so it's not like, instead of focusing on like how much extra money I can make, I would just try and focus on how much extra money I could not spend, right? Now, you still want to continuously keep making more money. But if you want to raise the average amount of money in your bank account, the fastest and easiest way to do it is just to not spend as much as you're currently spending. Unless, of course, you're not spending much at the moment because you haven't got much income, in which case it makes more sense to raise your income. But then, once again, it's not like raising how much you could possibly make, it's raising how much you could possibly accept to make, right? Different perspective. Like another example is with how many appointments you can get, right? You can book as many appointments you want this month, but if the next month you get none, you'll never achieve consistent growth. You might like experience growth in your business with like inconsistent appointment booking, but it will never be consistent. It will always be painful. And I've learned the hard way, very hard way, that the key to breaking your patterns and transcending your averages is to focus on the floor, which is you at your worst. So you have to focus on like who you can accept, basically. You have to focus on the floor and your standards, and that's how you raise this thing up. So we need to flip the floor, right? And this is what I call flipping the floor. It's a pretty awesome strategy. It basically revolves around inverting the floor and the ceiling, and basically making your current ceiling making your current floor your current ceiling. And then your new ceiling manifests as a result of that. Let me explain. So it took me a few years to figure this out. It took therapy sessions, it took Jungian clinical psychologist, a lot of shadow work, everything like this, right? And I've arrived at a very simple and practical conclusion. You have to flip the damn thing on its head. So you must understand that you do not become the best version of yourself you can imagine. You do not sustain your dream self. You do not maintain a godlike self-image. You can have it, but not for long. What you do become is your standard, right? The lowest version of yourself you can tolerate. You sustain your standards and maintain the you that you can tolerate. So you don't become the dream self. You don't become the best version of yourself you can imagine. You become the lowest version of yourself that you can accept. That's the truth, right? Who you are right now is really just what you're willing to accept, right? It's what you're willing to sort of take as your standard and tolerate, and that's that. And therefore, we don't want to set a goal for our behavior or self-image. We want to set a fucking standard. This is the secret to your goal, right? Sort of revealing this now. The goal that you set earlier, you don't want to see it as a goal. You just want to see it as a hygiene standard, right? A standard it's like something that you don't break or breach. So, for example, one of my standards is brushing my teeth every morning and every evening. Or another standard I would have is not eating a 6-month-old slice of bread. Another standard would be just roundhouse kicking the elderly, right? Not just gonna, one of my personal hygiene standards for behavior is just not walking up to random people in the street and punching them for no reason. Or another hygiene standard I would have is never dipping below a certain amount of appointments in a month, or never seeing us dip below a certain sales conversion rate. You have standards for all areas of your life, right? It could be how much money you've got saved, or how much money you've made, or what time you go to bed, etc., diet, sleep. Humans do not tolerate situations that they believe are intolerable, and we don't behave in ways that break our own standards. So there's no way in hell that I'm going to bed at 3 a.m. anymore, right? There's no way in hell that I'm going to spend a whole week just gorging out on McDonald's and eating shit food. Unless I'm going somewhere flying or something, I'm in bed by 10:30 every night. That is it's now just a hygiene standard, right? To 11 at the latest. If I'm not lights out, eyes closed by 11, I'm by the edge of my seat worried. It's kind of going to bed on time for me is the same as just not eating a horrible meal, right? Or a certain amount of money. So if we dip below a 7-figure run rate, for example, for Imperium, I would be I'd be on the edge of my seat. I'd be petrified. I'd be having panic attacks about that. It's kind of just as if a 7-figure run rate for my company is just the equivalent of not purposefully breaking my leg. Right? I will not do it. My body won't tolerate it. I won't allow for it to happen. And if it happened, I'd freak the fuck out and then try and fix it. So you want to assess your goals and look at the reality that you want. And instead of seeing it as this thing you put on this pedestal and this thing that you work towards, you just want to try and set it as a standard. Now, the key to understand here is that between achieving the standard and setting it, you've got to go through a long period of pain, a lot of time to create that standard and to solidify it in your life. But we don't want to see our goals as this sort of far away, distant land that we put on this pedestal that we can only access through the king's blessing. We just want to see it as something that happens no matter what, and we don't need to do anything for it to happen, if that makes sense. So that's really basically how we flip the floor. In other words, we don't progress to our best self imaginable. We regress to our worst self that is acceptable. We get what we can accept, not what we want. This is a fucking, if you're going to write something down, write this down. I will get what I accept, not what I want. Right? So if you want something, then you have to basically be I will not accept anything below that. And the key then is to set a new standard so that the version of yourself that you want to be is actually the worst version of yourself you could possibly tolerate. Okay? Let me say that again. If you want to do this and flip the floor, right? Go from floor to ceiling and hold your new floor becomes your current ceiling. what you want to do is set a standard so that the version of yourself you want to be is actually the worst version of you could possibly tolerate. Okay? This inverted nature of self-conception and progress is the secret. I shouldn't have called this module self-transcendence. I should have called it standard transcendence. You want to make your current best your new worst. So when you start trending up, right? When you start getting to the top of that peak, when we're up here at our personal ceiling, right? What you want to do is have the same emotional reaction to this as you would to this. So this is the key. It's the pain, it's the anger. So when, if you recall, right, when we're, I just come back up here. So when we're here, well, really, we don't want to be here because this is, this is a horrible place to be. You hate yourself, basically. We want to be here all the time. So this emotional state here of determination, motivation, being in the significant amount of pain, this is what starts to trend you upwards and push you towards this point, right? But what we want to try and do is when we get to this point here, right, we want to still be in this state. We want to perceive this part, right, to be worse than anything imaginable. We want to completely forget about where we're at, what our current standard is, and look at our personal ceiling at the moment of how much we want to make or whatever. And once we hit that, then that's it. We don't want to start to feel proud and satisfied. We want to feel a little bit disgusted that we're still there, right? Because that's basically how you stay productive and get the damn thing done. It's a pretty cool way to look at it. So this is how most people live, right? This is the sad truth, is most people have, a plateaued reality. The average stays consistent, right? It's just homeostasis of situation. And there's this strong fluctuation between two static self versions. So they've got the best self and then they've got the worst self, right? They're this is me at my best, this is me at my worst, and the average is sort of just the homeostasis. And what we want to also realize is that some people can live in a marginal increase, right? So some people will still make progress, but it will still be, this was me for basically this was my first few years in business. It's where you're making some progress, and over time your standards and your ceilings, they marginally increase. You've still got this strong fluctuation between two static self versions. But over time, as your floor raises, you're naturally increasing the ceiling too. So the key is you want to sort of try and narrow the gap a little bit, but you want to sort of extrapolate this out and just try to condense the wavelengths here. And the easiest way to do that is not by by lowering your ceiling, because you don't want to do that, because that's your advantage. Just want to take the floor and just sort of squeeze it up. And eventually you'll be able to bring it up, and bring it up will bring the average up. And then because we are by nature sort of goal striving mechanisms and transcendental individuals, once we understand how this works, if you bring the floor up to the ceiling, then what will happen is a new ceiling will manifest. Because you'll achieve a reality of let's say you want to make 10 grand a month and you want to have a little business where you can go and do whatever you want on a beach. If you set that lifestyle as a standard, then over time you'll achieve it as a standard, and then you might have it for a while, but then naturally you'll start to manifest new goals of being I want to be at multi 6 figures, and then I want to be on more beaches, right? And then another ceiling will set, and then you'll bounce between the two, and then you can just reset the standard. So this is how most people live, as a marginal increase. And then, this is how some people live with a marginal decrease, right? So not everyone most people are just like this, right? Where they're just plateaued. Some people are like this, right? Few. This was my first few years in business. It was a painful, disgusting experience, but I'm grateful for it because I have the hindsight to be able to help you avoid the pain. And then, this is the opposite of that. Where we're just declining down, the standards are just slipping, and with that the ceiling is getting lower and lower, and eventually the longer we do this for, eventually your ceiling becomes your floor. We do not want that to happen, right? And this is how the A players do it, right? So I've mapped this out for you. This is basically my trajectory. And I'm going to map this out in terms of how much money I've made and stuff, so you can really perceive this in a visual form. So, basically, the blue bit here is basically what I was doing here for like the first few years in business, right? Where I'm sort of plateaued out, or making some sort of marginal increase, right? But really, I was just sort of plateaued, like making the same amount of money. And, for the first I started making 10 grand a month after 6 months. But prior to that, when I was still getting started, I just didn't make anything at all. So I was at this plateau. But then, I had this floor, like savings of like 2 grand. And then I had this ceiling of like saving like 10 grand. And I was working, and I was a student as well. And I had some like freelance stuff going on. And really, I had no idea what I was doing. And like, I'd sort of fluctuate between having like 10 grand saved and 2 grand saved, depending on what stupid shit I bought and how clever I was with saving, right? But I'd never really save more than 10. I'd never really have less than 2. I kind of just, bounced between the two states. But then this is where it got really fucking interesting. Once I got into business, my first year was pretty, I started making 10 grand, but I still wouldn't save it. I'd still keep spending it. It was just stupid. But what happened after I cracked this, after like a while of dealing with it, is I sort of developed this new standard, which was 10 grand in the bank no matter what. So what happened here is like my previous ceiling was now the new floor, right? So I brought my floor up to my previous ceiling. So at this point in the blue line, I could not go beyond 10 grand a month, 10 grand in savings. But with the purple line, my floor was that I could not go below 10 grand in savings. So I sort of flipped it. I was like, right, 10 grand. I realized this. I was like, right, I've made 10 grand. There is under no circumstance in which I'm allowed to go below this. If I go below this, like, terrible things are going to happen, right? And so I created that. And I did that by becoming more aware and cognizant of my emotional reaction to being at 10K. Because as soon as I saved up 10 grand, I'd start to feel comfortable and relaxed and proud. And I mentioned to you before how I did this with saving money is I would just get rid of the money. So like I'd get rid of it, and like it would still be saved, but I wouldn't be able to access it because it'd be in the stock market or some sort of investment. And so I just started to build finances by not having to do this. Another example was like with how many clients I was signing. Like I remember at any given point I'd be retaining like around this point maybe like 6 clients or something. And once I got to 6, I'd be like feeling all comfortable and happy and good. Like, yeah, making like 6 figures. I'm great. And then I'd sort of stop prospecting and then fall off. And I was like, no, now I don't feel great about 6 clients. It sucks. I hate 6 clients. It feels awful, right? And then once you set that like 6 client sort of standard, then a new ceiling naturally manifests like, well, we need to double because 6 is horrible. It's not enough. Like Bo and I have this conversation a lot, right, with Imperium. Like, the other day, Bo sent some earnings over for like a week or something, and we made like $45,000 or $50,000 in like a week. And like he sent it to me, and he was like, "By the way, mate, just an update on the retained earnings, just under $50,000 in the last like 7 or 8 days." And I was like, "That sucks." And he was like, "I know, it's fucking shit, isn't it?" So like we do this. We don't celebrate financial gain. I know to an average person 50 grand in a week is like holy shit, but to us that's just like almost borderline disgusting. Like that's on the brink of like going out and punching a woman in the face, right? I'm just not going to go below that. I'm not going to punch a woman in the face, but the drastic example should convey my point. Like if we were like, oh my god, 50 grand in a week, amazing, I'm so proud, I feel so good, like that, like if we perceive 50 grand in a week to be pleasurable and gratifying, then we alleviate ourselves of the pain, and then if we alleviate ourselves of the pain, we lose it. Now I was talking to sales rep Jack, legend, if you're watching this, Jack, I love you, and he gave me this idea, and he said that pain is petrol, right? And it's honestly the truth. So when we make 50 grand in a week, like if we see that in a good light and we think that's great, we've made enough, that's fine, then we alleviate ourselves of the pain, which is obviously what most people try and do because, well, pain hurts. But the longer we stick with the pain and we're like, no, that fucking sucks, 50 grand is not good enough, we still feel the pain. So we're still motivated to keep growing it, because how much pain you're in depends on like your standard. So the standard you set will determine the level of pain, and the level of pain will determine the emotion will determine the action, right? So you have to just train yourself to sit in pain. If you sign a client, don't fucking celebrate. If you book a meeting, don't celebrate. Because what you celebrate becomes your standard. or becomes your ceiling rather, right? This is the thing. People have got it so backwards. They're like, everyone's like, yeah, celebrate your wins and, you know, congratulations, you did this, like, amazing. And don't get me wrong, like, it's good to sort of recognize achievement, but you don't want to strip yourself of the pain, because achievement becomes ceiling when gratification is present, right? What we want to do instead is, like, if someone's like, hey, Charlie, I'm using your program, I went from 0 to 10 grand a month in 6 months. I'm like, good for you, congratulations, but don't feel good about it. What do you mean? I should feel great. I've made 10 grand. It's like, as soon as you do that, you catch yourself, right? See 10 grand a month as like fucking disgusting, right? Or if you want to make 50 grand a month, don't see 50 grand a month as something to celebrate. See it as something to simply not tolerate anything but less, right? This is the key, is you have to just stay with the pain. Don't use goals to escape pain. Use goals to create pain. Because if you can do that, then you can grow. And this is what I did here. So my new lowest standard was, 10K in the bank no matter what. And, what happens here is when your current ceiling becomes your new floor, then you naturally create a new ceiling, because we're goal-striving animals. So you might average out at your floor for a while, but then what will happen over time is you'll start to build a new ceiling, and you'll start to want to have something new and something else. So like, when I was younger, I bought the car I've always wanted, which was an Audi A5. And then as soon as I bought the Audi A5, like, it felt great for a while and I felt comfortable and gratified. But then after a few months of that, I was like, I kind of want a C63 SAMG Mercedes. And then after that, it's like, I kind of want a Lamborghini. And after that, I kind of want... And it's just this never-ending sort of like hedonistic, I think it's called, hedonistic desire for more. But I've been able to sort of get over that materially now, and it's just more spiritual and relate to my personal growth. So what happened at this sort of purple average is this basically took me from 10 grand in the bank on average to 15 grand in the bank on average. So by raising my standard, I raised my new ceiling to 20 grand in the bank, and then my average was 15 grand in the bank. So it's not a huge difference, right? I only went from well, actually it is, because here oh shit, if I go back up here, right? So here my average in the bank is like, what, 6 grand? So ceiling of 10, floor of 2. So the average becomes like 6, 12 divided by 2. And then like once I got to this point, like my floor was 10 and my ceiling was 20, which meant my average was 15. So I went from on an average having 6 grand in the bank to 15. So you can this is how you do it. Like, you don't do it by raising the ceiling, because, well, then you're still going to break it back down to 2 grand. You have to raise the floor. And by raising the floor, I tripled how much was in my bank. And, I did this again, like, A players are constantly making their current floor their new ceiling. And once you get good enough at this, once you've done this a few times, you can start to set your new floor way above your current ceiling. So like, this is what I'm doing at the moment with like an 8-figure business. I'm now in the point where like, I had this as a big one, and I completely forgot about this. Like, slap on the wrist, Charlie. Seriously, like when I started making 200 grand a month with Imperium, like, I was a multi-7-figure entrepreneur. Like, I'd always wanted to be a multi-7-figure entrepreneur. And then I got comfortable and I got gratified, and I started to celebrate this. And I was like, YouTube videos, like, I'm making 200 grand a month and I'm feeling good and I'm feeling great. But then what happened is like 200 grand a month became my new ceiling, because I wasn't in pain about it. But now I look at 200 grand a month and feel sick, right? So then, and now what I'm doing is I'm like, I'm not gonna, like, my current floor is like, 80 grand a month, for example. But what I'm not going to do now is try and make my new floor 200 grand a month. I'm going to try and make it like $1 million a month, because, well, I've been able to do this like consistently for like going from like 0 to 10, from 10 to 30, from 30 to 50, from 50 to 100, from 100 to 200. So I'm just now at the point where I'm just like, well, I'm just going to like completely reset the thing to like even higher. And so my income, right? This is on the blue, and then I raised it on purple. So I raised the floor from 2 grand to 5 grand. So my new ceiling at this point is basically 15 grand, and my new floor is what my old ceiling was. Same thing happened with the orange. And this is where I am now. So this black thing is, my ceiling's 200 grand a month. Like, that's what we're currently capped at. We haven't gone beyond that yet, right? As of me recording this. However, my floor is 80 grand. So if we make less than like, basically like, well, really 100 grand, 80 to 100 grand in 1 month with Imperium, I'm like freaked out. I'm like panicked. I'm like, what the hell? I can't get anything below that. And part of this is like perceiving it and looking at how much we make and thinking, oh God, that's awful. But like, you know, now I'm aware of my new ceiling. I'm aware of my floor, I'm aware of my ceiling, and I'm now taking action and, you know, starting to go through this whole process again to build myself up to 8 figures. So I want my next floor to be 800 grand a month, if that makes sense. And, you know, I want to just keep building and keep growing. And this is really how it works. I just went from like, you know, 4 different versions of myself. Like every time if you're wondering like, at which point do you change as an individual? At which point does your identity actually shift and change? Really, like, your identity will shift with your standards. So version 1 of Charlie could tolerate 2 grand in the bank. Version 2 of Charlie could tolerate 10 grand in the bank. And then version 3 of Charlie could tolerate 50 grand in the bank. And then version 4 of Charlie couldn't tolerate anything less than a few hundred in the bank. And then it's millions, and then it keeps going on and on. And I've got no doubt that, you know, with enough time and, you know, God permitting I survive for long enough for compound to work, I won't tolerate anything less than $1 billion in the bank in cash, right? And I'm just going to consistently keep on growing this. And I've got no doubt in my mind that I can have $1 billion in cash if I'm given enough time, and if I'm given like the character to see it through and make it happen, which I believe I have because I can just give it to myself with enough iteration. Then why the fuck not, right? So you can apply the same psychological premise here. Just, you know, as you progress through the levels, it just gets like harder and also longer. And to achieve like billions requires compounding, which requires time and feedback, which you set into motion early. So that's the theory of floor flipping, right? That's honestly, that's the secret. It's perceiving your dream reality as the most painful situation you could possibly tolerate, right? So how do we invert this and make our new current desired ceiling into our new floor? Well, now we need to start exploring beliefs, right? And this is where we're going to start talking about the root of limit. Because really we've got 2 limits, right? We've got a limit to how far we can grow and a limit to how low we can go, right? And what we want to try and do is hack these limits, right? We want to try and, if we want to raise the floor, it's all good and well for me to say like, yeah, just raise the floor and just perceive it as painful, but I need to actually walk you through like what creates the floors and what creates the ceilings, and really that's just your beliefs. And so this part of the video is where we're going to be diving into limiting beliefs and how beliefs are formed and what different types of beliefs there are, and basically it's going to be a pretty awesome module. This part is really important. So we have to start by understanding that your floors and ceilings depend on your belief systems. So let's talk about beliefs, what they are and how they form and how they strengthen over time to limit us. So pretty obvious and simple question to start with the definition here, like what actually is a belief? Well, a belief is a perceived truth that a human being has about something or themselves. So there's a lot of synonyms for beliefs, right? You can have convictions, or you can have assumptions or viewpoints or outlooks or stances or opinions or positions, views, attitudes, judgments, whatever it might be. Basically, it's a statement of truth or perceived truth. Now, I say perceived truth because what most people believe is like the subjective truth, not the objective truth. So in life, there's the object and there's the subject. And when the subject perceives the object, the perception of the truth they actually have created for themselves is generally subjective to their viewpoint. So we don't see things for what they are, we see them for who we are, if that makes sense. And, you know, it's just a statement of truth. And your beliefs create your thoughts and your emotions, which create your behavior, which is basically the cause, and your life and your state of reality is the effect. And all your behavior is basically a direct result of your belief system, like all of it. So you have to imagine that like your beliefs are kind of like, how do you even articulate like what that is in like physical, illusionary, metaphorical form? It's not a very easy thing to articulate. Your beliefs are kind of like the bedrock of your consciousness, and everything that you are rests on that bedrock, and the bedrock sort of like is able to shift and move things around. And as it shifts and moves things, your reality is shifted and moved in conjunction with it. So like your bedrock might shift, your belief system might shift from one thing to the other, which means the rocks sort of move, which means that your identity moves. It's kind of like, you have to imagine that it's basically like sits at the bottom of your brain. Everything you ever think and do and feel is a result of it, and it can shift and change, and you actually have the ability to sort of like move the chess pieces and, you know, sort of move the pieces on the board, if that makes sense. And when you move the bedrock and you start to sort of shift it around and stuff, you behave in different ways, you become a different person, and as a result of that, your reality manifests. So it's kind of like, imagine that at the very bottom of your brain, now this is obviously not, you know, like accurate in terms of your actual neural anatomy, but at the bottom of your brain, you've got your sort of like bedrock of beliefs. It's kind of like you've got these huge mental tectonic plates that determine everything. And on top of those, you've basically got your thoughts. And then on top of that, you've got your emotions. And on top of that, you've got like your identity. And then on top of that, you've got your actions, your behavior. And on top of that, you've got relationships. Everything that is you is stacked on top of this. And then one shift in that bedrock can create a rippling change through everything. And like if the bedrock is very firm and it sort of just is very still and it doesn't move, then your reality is very sort of consistent and stable, albeit it may not be very accurate, albeit you may not be very happy with your reality. But the more you can like accept the fact that it's malleable, and the more you can play around with your bedrock, the more you can actually sort of manipulate it and adjust your reality according to it. But like, if you're watching this training, you're like, there's no way that that's how it works. I am who I am and that's it. It's a sign that you've got this very strong bedrock that isn't really movable and you can't make any changes to it. So what this means is that your beliefs literally determine your reality, life, and situation. And your belief system creates your reality. It's impossible to make $1 million if you don't believe it's possible. Because if you don't believe it's possible, you won't think to try, which means you won't behave in ways that would manifest it. So if your bedrock is sort of set in a way that basically states it's impossible to make $1 million, then that's how your thoughts are going to manifest and your emotions are going to manifest. And then that's basically how your identity is going to be formed. And then that's how you're going to behave. And then if you're not behaving in that way, then it won't happen. Like making $1 million is actually not difficult. It's just a question of like finding a market, building something valuable, and then selling it for a profit. And like, that's it. It takes time and skill and, you know, but if you perceive it as really difficult, you're going to make it really difficult. But if you actually look outside, like right now, like have a look out your window or look around, you'll see $1 million pretty much anywhere. You know, like, I don't know, if I look out my window right now, I can see some houses that are probably worth like a couple of $100,000 each, and there's some flats. And then if I look down the road, there's a lamppost that's probably worth a few thousand. And in the sky, there's like a little trail of some jet fuel that's probably worth, you know, 1,000, or the plane itself would be worth loads. There's some, you know, cars down the road that are worth money. The tarmac on the pavement is probably worth like 10 grand. Doesn't take you, there's money everywhere, right? But most people don't see the world in that way. And most people don't believe it's possible, but your beliefs basically, they are the stem of your entire worldview. Your entire reality truly is like what you believe it is. You can only accomplish a reality if A, you believe it's possible, and B, you believe you can. So there's 3 types of belief that we need to focus on to make progress. So this part has taken me a long time to figure out. And by a long time, I mean like, I've been thinking about this stuff on and off for basically like 5 years. I've read everything I can get my hands on to do with beliefs. I've done every training I can think of. I've spent like hours just in a notepad and pen in a dark room. Like sometimes I have thoughts about it, like, you know, 4 a.m. and wake up and start jotting stuff down. This is really what I'm like happy to have discovered. There's 3 types of belief that we need to focus on. You've got domain-based beliefs, you've got identity-based beliefs, and behavior-based beliefs. Right? So everyone's just like, change your beliefs, change your life. But first things first is nobody really knows what a belief is, right? And then nobody really knows like what different types of belief they have. So I'm going to break this down to first principles into just some real core categories for you and help you understand this. So domain-based beliefs these are subjective observations about specific domains of reality. So a domain is basically an area or a fragment of reality. So for example, like one domain would be like trees, and then you could have a subdomain which could be like oak trees, and then you could have like your belief about oak trees. So like maybe you've got like a belief like oak trees take 1 million years to grow, right? It's not accurate, right? But that's a belief that you have, and that's what you believe to be true, so that's how you see the world. And when you see an oak tree, you think, holy fucking shit, there's 1 million years of progress right there. And that's genuinely what you see. But that's a domain-based belief, right? So your reality is manifesting as a result of a belief you have about the thing you're perceiving in your subjective like perception of that thing is projecting an image to you that doesn't actually represent the truth, but it represents what you believe the truth to be. Underneath domain-based beliefs, we have identity-based beliefs. So these are statements about your relationship with the domain in question. Okay, so what this is basically, you have the domain and you have a collection of beliefs about the domain, but then there's you, and you need to understand how you fit into that domain, how you integrate with it, how you relate to it, how you act in accordance with it, and that's really your perception of you in relation to the domain. So if we were to continue, for example, with the domain of oak trees, right, the subdomain of oak trees within trees, you could have this identity-based belief of, I really like the look of oak trees, right? That's like a statement about your relationship with oak trees. Or I'm really impressed by oak trees because they take 1,000,000 years to grow, right? You can extend this to literally anything, but pretty tangible example for you just to make it clear. And so that forms an identity around oak trees, right? And it's not like a important one necessarily because it's not really about business, but nonetheless, it's like it's a self view. It's a personal like introspective paradigm that you hold about yourself in relation to a concrete object or a concrete domain that is tangible. Okay. Below identity-based beliefs, we have behavior-based beliefs, and there's a fine line here between like how you act and how you believe, but really like how you believe you act is how you act as well. So these aren't necessarily like concrete beliefs as obvious as what we've just explained, but behavior-based beliefs kind of are, they are statements about how you act and behave within or accordance to the domain. So these are more statements about your behavior. So an example of this could be, I don't chop oak trees down, or I don't buy oak furniture, right? Or, every time I see an oak tree, I spit on it. I don't for good luck. I have no idea like what people do with trees. I'm just making it up at this point. But like what my point there is, it's still sort of like a self-concept. It's still a self-belief. But instead of it being like a statement about like your relationship to the thing, it's a statement about how you interact with the thing, right? And so these are the three beliefs. Now, most people just see beliefs as beliefs and they don't really break it down into these three constituent parts. But I wanted to not put this module together until I'd understood it enough to actually articulate it in a way that was cohesive enough for you to hopefully understand it then. I didn't plan on using oak trees as an example, but there's literally like a tree outside and I don't think it's an oak tree, but there's an example. That's an identity-based belief. I don't think that's an oak tree, right? Like, therefore, I'm not going to call it an oak tree. That's a behavior-based belief, right? So the domain-based belief is that's a tree, and the identity-based belief, I don't think it's an oak tree because that's me. It's like I'm not identifying that thing as an oak tree. It's like my perception of it. I don't think it is. Behavior, therefore, I'm not going to call it one, right? Pretty weird examples. I'm going to give you loads of examples of this to really solidify it, because in an intangible form, just through articulate explanation, this doesn't make much sense, but I promise I'll give you some examples. So here are some examples, as I promised. So domain-based, right? We're going to sort of go through this and then we'll go through the identity and behavior-based. So as we know, the domain-based beliefs are subjective observations about a domain of reality. So for example, the domain could be sales or salespeople. And a domain-based belief that you might have is all salespeople are slimy. All salespeople are like malicious or something, right? Another domain is niches, right? Or niching, specifically like the domain of niching, how you see niching in business. And one of your a domain-based belief here could be niching down as a terrible idea, right? Another domain could be drawing, right? Like the creative expression of putting pen to paper or pencil to pen or whatever it is and drawing something. And like you one of your perceptions or one of your beliefs around the domain of drawing could be that drawing is only good for people with talent. So these are belief statements at the highest level. They don't have much relation to who we are, right? Or how we interact or how we behave or how we are related to this thing. That comes after it. So then we have identity-based beliefs. Now, identity-based beliefs, these are typically like a product of the domain-based beliefs. So the domain-based beliefs are very sort of paradigmal in their nature. It's how you see the thing that determines the belief that you form. But then the identity is sort of like, it's built out of that paradigm. So for example, with the salespeople one here. So we've got like, the domain-based belief is all salespeople are slimy. And the identity-based belief would be, I'm just not built for sales. because we don't want to see ourselves as slimy. So of course we're not built for sales because we think salespeople are slimy, right? And another one could be like, if the domain-based belief is niching down as a terrible idea, then the identity-based belief would be I prefer a generalized business because it's me, it's I identify with a generalized business. I'm not built for sales, right? Or the drawing example, if you think or you believe that drawing is only good for people as a domain-based belief, like people with talent, then the identity would be I'm goddamn awful at drawing, right? Because talent is this sort of it's like a way to like exclude yourself from a group of people, and if you don't perceive yourself to have the talent, then you're going to believe that you're goddamn awful at drawing. So if people are like, oh, like the only way to become a pro basketball player is to be like is to have God's gift basketball abilities, but then generally speaking, like if you think that, then you're not going to have God gifted abilities to do basketball, because you'd recognize that if you were good at basketball, you only can acquire those talents through hard work and skill, not talent. But if you believe it's just talent, it's a good scapegoat for you to then believe you're not good at it. And then behavior-based beliefs. So I never know what to say. If you believe you're not built for sales, then, well, the behavior would not, like, it would, you believe that you don't know what to say on calls. And another behavior-based belief, if you say you prefer generalization in business, is not having a niche, right? Because that's actually how you interact with the thing. It's not how you relate to the thing, it's how you interact with it. And then also, I never bother drawing. So like, if you think that you're like bad at drawing, then you're not going to draw, right? So the behavior will just be you're not drawing. And then your reality will be that you never draw. Now that's the reason I put that in there, that's actually an example for me. Now I kind of recognize at this point that drawing is not only for people with talent, and you can learn to draw, but at the same time, like I don't really want to focus too much on drawing because it doesn't really relate to any of my goals, which ironically is an identity-based belief, which is built off of a domain-based belief that focus is important, right? So this is all, it's very intertwined, but I'm hoping this makes a lot of sense. And then at the bottom, we have the reality. So reality number one of believing all salespeople are slimy, which creates, I'm not built for sales, which creates never know what to say. That reality of that is no clients. The second reality would be a chaotic business because you don't have a niche. And the third reality would be being shit at drawing because you don't draw. If you don't draw, of course you're going to be shit at it. It's like people who are like, I'm bad at sales, I don't have any clients. Well, of course you don't. You've never done fucking sales calls before. Like, what do you expect, right? And this is how your paradigm creates your identity. Your paradigm sort of jams your identity. So this is what I mean by that sort of bedrock that can shift the tectonic plates of your consciousness, right? Your core beliefs, because like your identity-based beliefs and behavior-based beliefs, and therefore your ultimate reality, is underpinned by the domain-based beliefs that you hold to be true. And so if you can shift around the domain-based beliefs and challenge that, then in turn you kind of have to change your identity to align with that, and then you have to change your behavior. So most people, when they try and change their beliefs, they just focus on the behavior ones, right? So like they're sort of like, and this is also the biggest issue with people trying this. Okay, let me lay this out. This is the biggest problem, because what happens is someone starts a business and then they start doing the actions required to make the business happen, like cold email or sales calls and stuff. But they sort of address the behavior, but they never address how they actually perceive the domain of business or sales or appointment booking in the first place. And so what happens is they start behaving and they start trying to like do the actions and stuff, and they might make some progress, but fundamentally they're always going to self-sabotage or regress back to their flaw because, well, their perception of the domain is just totally fucked. So like, if someone goes into business for themselves and they have this domain-based belief that like money is really hard to get, but they still start a business, right, which would kind of be odd, but it happens all the time, then they're going to start working to try and make money, and they'll be taking the actions to try and make money, but it will never work, and it will never be, their behavior will never be consistent enough to actually compound an outcome that creates financial freedom, because they don't believe that financial freedom is possible. And we cannot manifest realities if we perceive them to be impossible to obtain. Human beings do not operate like that. Your actions are always in alignment with your beliefs, and your beliefs of your identity and your behavior are always in alignment with how you perceive the thing to be. There are caveats to this. So for example, I can say sales is hard to learn, right? And still be insane at sales. But the truth is that I believe sales to be quite easy to learn, right? Because that sort of feeds back on itself. Anyway, This is what I mean. Your paradigm jams your identity, which ultimately prevents you from changing. And what do I mean by jams, right? Like how I'm obviously not talking about, the bottled confectionery that's got a load of sugar in it. Like, what do I mean here? Well, you might remember Mr. Universe from Eyes of Providence. This is when we discussed paradigms at the beginning of this module. And if you haven't seen Mr. Universe yet, then what the hell are you doing here? Go back and watch each video minute by minute. I know I talk a lot, but it's with intention. The reason I repeat myself over and over again is because you need to be reminded more than taught, and unpacking complicated psychological ideas like this, you kind of have to be a bit verbose because, well, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So if you remember this little thought experiment that we did in module 1 here is, let's say Mr. Universe draws up 2 circles on a canvas in 2 shades of green, and the 2 green circles represent the 2 ways people can perceive like how easy it is to get good at sales. If the person sees the dark green tone, they'll perceive that sales is easy, and if they see the light green tone, then they'll perceive sales as hard. So someone with a light green tone, their domain-based belief is that, like, it could be like sales is only for people with talent, or sales is only, you can only sell if you have enough money to buy a suit, right? These are like domain-based beliefs that people hold. If you have a dark green tone and you see it in the dark green light, then you might think anyone can learn sales, or if Charlie can do it, so can I. Well, that actually might be like an identity-based belief, but there's a bit of a blurred line between each of these steps, by the way. It's not a perfect model. But that's my point. We've got these 2 people, and along come 2 subjects, which is a very appropriate word for them because, well, they are literally both subjective. And they have their own preconceived paradigms and notions towards sales, which is obviously denoted by the colour of the glasses they're wearing. And they walk up to the canvas, and this is what they see. So if you have the paradigm or the domain-based beliefs that sales is easy to master, then you're going to look at the canvas and see the dark green circle. If you believe that sales is hard to master, then you're going to look up the canvas and you're going to see that the light green circle denoting that sales is hard to master. And these lenses on these glasses are domain-based beliefs, right? And this is how it works. And what will happen is, like, the Mr. Universe will basically be like, well, actually, mate, sales will be whatever you see it as being to you, right? People think that they're not good at sales, but the only reason they're not good at sales is because they think they're not good at sales. And the only reason they think they're not good at sales is because they're not good at sales, and that's because they think they're not good at sales. So it's a fucking feedback loop, man. If right now your current reality is that you're not very good at sales, it's probably because you think you're not good. But the reason you think you're not good is because you're not good, and that's because you think you're not good. So we have to interfere here at some point, and the easiest place to interfere with is with the thoughts. And the easiest, and most impactful way to change this is with the domain-based beliefs that sales is actually not this scary thing that you think it to be. So the green person would say that mastering sales is easy, like the dark green person and the light green person would say it's impossible. They'd be like, you're either born with it or you're not. And then, the dark green person would basically be like, well, actually, I'm becoming a great salesperson. They might look at their reality and think like, right now, I kind of suck at sales. However, I firmly believe that with enough practice and work, it's entirely possible for me to become one of the best in the world. And then the person with the light green, these are, by the way, identity-based beliefs. The person with the light green is like, I couldn't sell a free house to a homeless man, right? Basically the domain-based beliefs here of whether or not sales is easy to master or not will manifest into the identity-based beliefs, which is based on how you are related or how you integrate with the domain. And then how you integrate with the domain, what your relationship is with it, will basically determine how you interact with it. So then, the dark green person who believes he's becoming good or believes that it's possible to get good will try. And they'll be like, because really it's just trying, right? The dark green person will be like, yep, sales calls, all right, bit nervous, but I'm going to give it a go because I believe this is a good practice. And then the person with the light green, they'll just be like, I don't want to do sales calls because they believe that sales is hard to master, and they believe that they couldn't sell a free house to a homeless man, so what the hell sort of chance do I have on a high ticket sales call with a business? And ultimately, these behavior-based beliefs create their reality. So your reality is a result of your behavior, which is a sort of belief system you have around how you act within the world. And then that system is a result of the system of your identity, which is how you relate to the world and how you integrate with it. And then that system is a result of how you perceive the world in the first place. So this is why I taught you guys paradigms at the start, because I knew I'd have to come back to this and sort of explain it and bring it down. But this then relates back into the sort of ceiling and the floor, because your floor is really a collection of like beliefs around what you can tolerate, and your ceiling is a collection of beliefs around what is actually good for you, and what a situation of quote unquote good looks like, or great looks like. All we have to do is change our paradigm of perception of like what we can tolerate and what is good and what is bad, to raise that floor to the current ceiling and continuously grow exponentially. And the reality would be green, dark green signs a client, light green doesn't. And this is how your paradigm jams up your identity. And there's actually a quote here that I don't think this is related specifically to this topic, but Descartes was a philosopher, and he obviously said, I think, therefore I am. Now, most people take that saying in the respect of like, if you're a thinking conscious being, then you technically are something, because to be something, you have to think. That's sort of like the denotion of that philosophical underpinning of that idea. However, I'm seeing this from the perspective of like, I think, therefore I am, is kind of like, if I think I am, then I am, right? So if I think I'm good at sales, then I'm good at sales. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't just convince yourself of something that isn't true right now. But my point here is it's entirely possible to get good at sales. You can't just like, if you're shit at sales right now and you're really bad at it and you can't close anyone, you can't just today think like, yeah, I'm amazing at sales, great, right? And then tomorrow start closing deals like there's no tomorrow, because mastery still requires experience, which requires time and applied action. But my point is that if you believe that you're evolving into someone who's going to be great at sales, then what will happen is you'll start to try, and gradually you'll get better. It's not, you can't just go from shutting your eyes and thinking, right, now I've got no money in the bank, I believe I'm a millionaire, and then tomorrow you've got $1 million. I'm sorry, but it's not that easy. The point of this mindset training is to give you cognitive and mental weapons to help you deal with the pain associated with taking the action to consistently grow and make more money, while stopping yourself from holding yourself back and sort of jamming the mechanism, if that makes sense. And so it goes from belief about domain to identity around domain to behavior in domain to reality. And here's some other examples, right? So I've got this little resource for you. It's basically, I'm going to call it the experience to reality hierarchy. It's a little sort of spreadsheet I put together to just sort of explain some other examples of how this works, because I just want to really solidify this understanding of this sort of trifecta of beliefs that sit on top of each other, which create a reality. So here we've got the experience, right, which is obviously, you know, all of your beliefs. We discussed this in the paradigm module. Every belief you have, every paradigm you have starts with an experience or a thought, which then feeds back on itself. And this can be sensory or hallucinatory, in terms of it can be a thought or a memory or imagination. Like, you can imagine a plane crashing whilst you're a kid before you get on a plane, and be terrified to get on a plane without even having gotten one, right? And then the domain-based is like forming a perspective. So we have the experience, and therefore we form a perspective about the domain. Once we form a perspective about the domain, we therefore form an identity based on the domain's perspective. Therefore, we form behavior to align with our identity, and therefore we confirm a reality. So I've got some examples for you here. The last 5 are related to business, and the first 5 are random. Let me just walk you through these. I'm going to go through each of them, because I know I'm repeating myself, and I know this is like kind of repetitive and perhaps even annoying, but you kind of want to just drill this into your brain. I'd go as far to say that you need to watch this mindset training like 10 times over. Like I've come back to core mindset lessons and books and stuff like literally over 100 times at this point, and that's not even an exaggeration. Like every week I come back to shit like this to remind myself of it, because the last thing I want to do is forget this. We're very forgetful creatures, right? So let's start from the top here. So the experience could be that when you're younger, your parent calls Einstein a genius, and therefore you build a domain-based belief that Einstein was a genius, right? And therefore your identity is I respect Einstein, or I'm an Einstein fan. And therefore the behavior base is you read Einstein's work. And therefore your reality is that Einstein's work was groundbreaking, right? Because you read the work and then you're like, holy shit, this is awesome. It aligns with the genius thing. Like, the irony is that you could read Einstein's work, and even if it wasn't groundbreaking, you'd still perceive it to be groundbreaking because you believe he's a genius. So everything that you read of his will be channeled through this genius thing. So for example, if you respect me, and if you think I'm clever, then every piece of work that I send you, you'll be like, oh my God, that's amazing. But if you think I'm an idiot and I try and teach you something, then you'll just see it as stupid. And that's how it works. So experience 2. I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll just go through a few and then you can read the rest. You just pause the thing. But like experience, I know that contradicts what I just said, but it just occurred to me it's going to take ages to explain each one when you can just pause it. So experience. So let's say that one of your friends on Facebook shares a post about flat earth theory on Facebook. And, you know, you read it and like it's a long essay and it gives you loads of evidence and you've never really thought that the earth is round. You've never given it much thought and therefore you think the earth is flat. So the reason a lot of people think the earth is flat is because like there's no sort of like, by the way, I don't think the earth is flat. I think it's as spherical as a fucking tennis ball, mate. But my point here is people think that the earth is flat and that people can be receptive to the information of the earth being flat because they've never really considered that the earth is round. Like growing up and going through high school and stuff, like, yeah, of course the earth is round, but there's no real argument. Nobody's ever argued about it, so they haven't really confirmed a strong belief that it's round. Until someone comes along and tries to contend it, then that might happen. But they believe the earth is flat, and therefore the identity is like, I'm a flat earther, and then the behavior is I go to flat earth conventions, and then the reality could be knowing there's more evidence for the flat earth theory, right? And then another example, there's a remix on YouTube, a song called You and Me, remixed by Flume, who's my favorite music artist, right? The reason Flume is my favorite music artist is not because of some magical random alignment. It's just because he served me enough auditory impressions. Right? He's just served me enough experiences for me to love it. Right? So there's a video on YouTube. It's called You and Me. It's Flume remix. It's got millions of views and loads of likes and stuff. And and therefore this is quite a big jump. But therefore, I might believe that Flume's a great musician. Right? Now, I might not off the bat think he's the best musician of our generation, but I'd be like, the domain-based belief would be Flume is talented, right? Or that's like making that sort of music requires some level of talent or something. I don't know, but let's just jump to the extreme and say that I listen to You and Me, it resonates with me, everyone says it's great, and then I'm like, holy shit, this is the best musician of our generation. And then the identity would be like, I love Flume, because if you believe that someone is the best musician of your generation, then you're going to love their music because you kind of can't not love it if you believe it's the best, right? And then, the behavior would be I listen to Flume music every day, and then the confirmed reality is like Flume makes the best music in the world. Now, believe it or not, this is my reality. I've spent so much time listening to Flume that I genuinely believe he makes the best music in the world. Now, is this true? Well, it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not objectively because something like music can only ever be subjective. So to me, to my reality, Flume is the best artist ever to grace the earth. But then to other people, he's the worst. And that's fine, right? We both have different perceptions of reality based on our domain-based beliefs, which our identity is then manifested from, which our behavior manifests from, which our reality is then born from. And I don't care if someone hates Flume. I don't care if someone thinks he's evil. That's just their reality, which is a result of their identity and domain. And I'm not going to get pissed off by someone's domain-based beliefs just because they're not out of alignment with mine. That's just stupid. I've got money to make, for crying out loud, right? So here's some examples in sales. I'll read one of these. Let's just say an experience I had in sales is my first sales call. I tried to handle objections on, bombed. I didn't close. So someone said they want to think about it, and I tried to attack it, and they didn't close. And they told me I was a dickhead for trying to try. And therefore, I have formed this domain-based belief that prospects are turned off by objection handling. And therefore, I don't bother with objections. And therefore, I always panic when someone objects and I let the prospect think about it. And therefore, prospects thank me for giving them time. So this confirms a reality, right? Where prospects are like, I appreciate you not pushing me, I'll get back to you. Or I appreciate that, I love it, I'll get back to you. And we confirm this reality that we think is the right thing to do, but we're actually stupid. Another example, experience. You see a post on Facebook about sales being hard in the agency space or the high ticket space, and it gets hundreds of likes and a bunch of comments saying, yep, sales is hard. Therefore, your domain-based belief becomes that everyone struggles with sales. And then if you're a herd animal, which we are, unless you can break free of the herd animal mentality, you might form an identity, which is I find sales difficult. Now, the cool thing I've got about this is when I see everyone struggling with something, I immediately believe it's an easy thing to do because everyone's usually stupid, right? And I don't mean that by some sort of egotistical intelligence measure against myself. I just mean if everyone's doing something and they're struggling to do it, then it's probably actually quite an easy thing to do, because the reason everyone's struggling is because they think everybody else is struggling, so they perceive it to be hard. So all we have to do is separate ourselves from the perception of the thing to find it easy. But let's say you haven't got that insight and you see this post, and therefore you start thinking everyone's struggling, and then you start thinking that, you know, sales is difficult, and you start saying, I find sales hard. And then like the behavior of that is always saying the wrong things. So like, you know, the belief of your behavior is I always say the wrong things. And then then it's like, oh, I screwed up that sales call, which means that I struggle with sales and find it hard. So I'm everyone, I'm part of the herd. I feel comfortable knowing I'm in the same boat as everybody else. If I'm in the same boat as everybody else, I'm freaking the fuck out, right? But my point here is, you can read through the rest of these, but when I do coaching calls and stuff, people come to me and they're like, hey Charlie, can you help me? I always say the wrong things on sales call. Or can you help me, Charlie? I really just don't try for the one call close, and I'm not sure how to ask for the close, right? But the problem with this is, like, if I say like, well, here's how to ask for the close, they're still not going to do it because they have this identity-based belief they're not a pushy person. And it's not because of that, it's because they believe that people don't buy on the first call. So what happens is most coaches try and address this sort of like behavior or this reality, right? When in reality, it's all the way up here that really matters. So have a read through those. And that's my little resource. I had some fun putting that one together. The experience to reality hierarchy. It's pretty cool, and just check it out when you can. So this is how your reality has formed, right? We have this wavelength, right? We have a ceiling and a floor, and the ceiling and the floor have been created by your beliefs. So I believe that $50,000 in 1 week is sickening and next to nothing and should not be celebrated. And therefore, my floor is $50,000, because when I'm making $50,000 a week, or $200,000 a month, I'm in pain. Like, it creates pain, it creates agony, it creates frustration. It does not create comfort. It completely creates the polar opposite. And like, my ceiling at the moment is 8 figures. So like, by setting a goal, we immediately set a ceiling. But we have to set a ceiling because otherwise we have nothing to work towards. But what we want to do is like set the ceiling, but then focus on raising the floor to that ceiling. So right now, I need to work on this, because if I made 8 figures, I'd be amazed. I'd be so happy about it. I'd be like feeling all proud, and I'd be in no pain. I'd be great. But then like, that's kind of contradictory to what I've just said, which is why I need to work on my perception of 8 figures, which is what I'm doing at the moment. And as soon as I can perceive it to be nothing less than what I will tolerate, then I'll start to behave in that way. My behavior will correct, and then, you know, with enough time, over a few years, I'll start to grow and scale. And then, you know, 8 figures. And whether it's with this business or like a property company or a hedge fund or an investment firm, which is other companies that I plan on starting, we'll get there, and we will, and 8 figures will become a thing. And then I'll be like, okay, this is painful. 9 figures, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen to me, isn't it? I'd hate 9 figures, and then we go to billions. So I like, whether or not this stuff works at the sort of 9-figure, 10-figure, 11-figure mark, I don't know, because there's a lot more variables than personal psychology when it comes to making way more money based on my observations of autobiographies and stuff. But dude, if you just want to go to like, you know, a couple of $100,000 a month, or, you know, 8 figures or whatever, this is the way to do it. And I can tell you that because, well, I've done it, and I've also seen it done by other people when I've asked them. So it's time to get concrete, right? So that's the theory. Okay, we've gone through the theoretical underpinnings of this, so let's get concrete. It's now time to understand, we understand how beliefs form and their nature. So now let's get to the bottom of your beliefs, so we can start working on them to ultimately change your reality. So the first step is to actually define, accept, and come to terms with your current belief system. So I want you to actually just go ahead for me here, and I want you to pick 2 things in your life that are holding you back from your goal. And these can be unrelated to your goal if you want, but I wouldn't suggest this for now. So like, the thing is with your belief systems is you've got scales, and you've got belief systems and domain-based beliefs and all of this stuff. You've got it for hundreds of thousands, more things than you can imagine. Everything from oak trees to sales, you have beliefs around. Now, obviously what we're not going to do here is pick the domain of oak trees and try and change our perception of oak trees so we can align our reality with how long it actually takes for a tree to grow. That doesn't really matter, right? That's not very important to our goal. So what I want you to do is I want you to pick 2 things in your life, right? 2 domains that are currently holding you back. So it might be appointment booking, it might be sales, it might be hiring, it could be service delivery, it could be product development. Like, all of these are business domains, However, really they're personal domains because how we perceive them is it's a reflection of us and who we are. But you can pick two things, right? So maybe you think fitness, and then I also want objection handling. The more specific you get, the better. So instead of like sales, break down the domain of sales into the subdomains, right? Or instead of it being appointment booking, break appointment booking down into the subdomains, like getting positive replies or follow-ups, for example. The more specific you can get with subdomains or subdomains, the better your chances of actually changing the beliefs. Because if you try and attack like a huge domain like sales, you can change your beliefs towards sales, right? It's possible to do it from a macro level, but it makes more sense to sort of break the war down into a few battles and then win one battle at a time. And then by winning each battle, you win the war of sales. So if we break sales down, for example, as a domain, you then have the subdomains of like your beliefs about prospects and are they going to buy, or do they have money, and like, are they going to react well and stuff. Then you've got your beliefs about asking questions, like is it appropriate to ask emotional questions, or do I use this pricing strategy, or like if I pitch it like this, do people buy? And then you've got objections, which is a big one, like, you know, are prospects going to hate me objection handling? I'm really scared of objections. I'm not good with objections. Objections terrify me. I don't want to try and push people. I'm not a pushy person. Don't just go for a big domain, go for subdomains, because well, it's easier to win a battle than a war, and a war is an aggregate of battles, and if we can break it down, it tends to be a lot easier. So micro, not macro, for this sort of instance here. So pick them, right? I want you to write them down. We're going to only choose two things because in my experience, like there's usually like one or two big bottlenecks that are stopping you from your goal. It could be appointment booking, it could be sales, for example, it could be like your show rate, right? It could be like a certain problem you've got with clients or something, like a problem with lead quality for clients. But just pick the two things, right? Pick them both, write them down. The more specific and the more tangible, the better, okay? Write these two things down. They don't have to be appointment booking or sales, but you know, whatever you perceive to be the two biggest problems in your business right now, holding you back from achieving your goal, is the things you should write down, and then ideally try and find the sub things. So it might not be sales, it might be objection handling that you're struggling with. It might not be objection handling, it might be the questioning, right? Might not be appointment booking, it might just be like sourcing the leads or whatever. Now, what we're gonna do is go through a fucking awesome resource, right? Called Mapping Your Current Belief System. And this, my friends, this is where we really start to bring things to light. And this is where shit really starts to like get real, okay? So I've got this resource here called Mapping Your Current Belief System, and we're going to go through it. And like, there's a saying here. Let me go through it. So this is from Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. This stops now. Let's map out your belief systems around the 2 to 3 biggest issues or bottlenecks in your life, preventing you from achieving your goal. So before we can change our beliefs, we have to accept what we have at the moment. I don't mean accept in terms of settle. I mean accept in terms of knowing that it's there. We have to become aware of it, because we cannot defeat an enemy we don't know exists, okay? And we need to bring it to light because we have to fight these things. This resource is used to map your beliefs around a certain domain. A domain is a topic, discipline, or area of your life. Money, for example, fitness, appointment booking. Obviously, I mentioned it can be a subdomain. Beliefs are basically just perceived truth statements, convictions, assumptions, or views and opinions. Be brutally honest with yourself while defining them. And I won't lie, this takes a long time to think of. This takes hours or days of critical reflection, right? If you can map your beliefs out in like under a minute, then you've definitely done something wrong. It typically takes me a day of thinking to get to the truth, right? And the clue is just to look at your thoughts and your thought patterns. So like if I want to get to 8 figures, I need to convince myself that like 10 million a month isn't a lot of money, but I need to get back to like the real root cause of why that exists, right? And it takes a long time to really know that. So this is an ongoing process, and you'll be coming back to this all the time. The worst thing you can do is do this for 2 things and then not come back to it, right? To be honest, honestly, come back to this mindset module like every month if you can. But the more you go back through this stuff and the more you remind yourself of this whole stuff will determine how quickly you make your progress. In fact, I would just like write down and make a little commitment on your notepad right now. Like I will revisit this every 2 months. Like, dude, I come back to my core mindset trainings and books like basically every month, every week if I can, because this is the shit I don't want to forget. The business stuff doesn't really matter. This is what moves the needle. And this is what I've mapped out here is my personal SOP for breaking bottlenecks. So I've gone from being like completely useless when it comes to appointment booking, and having no appointments on my calendar and loads of white space, to now having too many appointments. This was a problem for us for a long time, right? We started to book 8 appointments a day, and then we could no longer sign anymore. Like it became impossible to have more. I used to be fucking dreadful at sales, but I wanted to be good at sales, and I worked on this, and this is the exact thing that I used to do it. So I'm sharing with you something that actually works, not just something that I've pulled out of thin air or just found on a YouTube search. This is an actual tangible resource that I've used time and time again. Now, what we're going to be doing is focusing on changing your domain-based and identity-based beliefs. That's because if you correct these, your behavior-based beliefs will automatically align. So what you'll recall is obviously we've actually got 3 types of belief, right? Based on, this, for example, we've got our domain-based belief, which is our subjective observation of the thing itself. Then we've got identity, which is how we, our relationship with that thing. And then we've got our behavior, which is how we interact with the thing. And then we've got our confirmed reality. Now, what we're not going to be doing is focusing on your behavior-based beliefs, because these are a product of these, right? So if we want to change your behavior, to change your reality, we just need to change your identity and then obviously your paradigm as well. The big moves are going to happen in your domain-based beliefs, right? Because if you want to build an identity, let's say you want to convince yourself that you're the kind of person to make loads of money, but if you've still got a domain-based belief that money's hard to come by, then that's the root of the issue. So we have to root that thing out and address it first. Okay? We need to start to unjam our mental programming systems to recognize possibilities that we previously did not have the ability to see because we were blind to them. So we're not going to be focusing on behavior-based beliefs because they will manifest as a result of our domain-based and identity-based beliefs. Okay. Now we're actually going to be mapping out 3 domains. So I've obviously asked you to pick 2, but I've actually picked one for you, right? Okay. We've already picked the one out for you, which is the domain of beliefs itself. So this is a ninja level tactic that I learned pretty early on. Before, in conjunction with the 2 things, the biggest bottleneck you'll have to begin with is believing in believing, right? So the first domain is the domain of beliefs. Because if you believe that you can't change your beliefs, or if you believe that people can't change, or if you believe that self-certification is absolute, then you're not going to keep trying or consistently use any sort of belief system or belief correction system that I give you. So the most important thing to get out of the way first, and the most important thing to meditate on and affirmate on and visualize, which we'll be covering, by the way, at the end of the mindset training in the last video, in terms of how to actually affirmate and manifest these things. The most important thing is the belief around beliefs. So it's the meta domain, right? This is the most important domain to crack at the start of the meta domain. You need to, I don't mean meta in terms of the new Facebook business name, right? I mean it from the perspective of it being the thing above the thing. You need to map out everything you believe to be true about beliefs, identity, and mindset. This is the most important thing to begin with, because if you don't believe you are a changing, evolving individual with the ability to take control and take responsibility, and if you don't believe your beliefs can even be changed, then you'll just give up. So this is the problem I see with if someone starts doing affirmations, and if someone starts trying to evolve their consciousness and become someone that can, and they give up, then it's a sign that what's happened is the only reason they've given up is because they don't trust that it works. And so what we need to do is we need to build trust in the process of change before we can undergo change. Otherwise, you'll start to undergo change and you've still got this sort of massive meta belief that changing your beliefs is just impossible. And you might give it a go for a while, but you'll never sustain it because, well, fundamentally, it's just not true. And this is the hardest thing to overcome, because your sense of self you have right now and your current sense of identity, it wants to live, right? It's got sort of a inbuilt mechanism for clinging on, and it wants to survive. Who you currently are does not want to die, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to bring this meta belief forward that it's hard for you to change and that you can't change and you can't evolve. But it's really important that we kill this thing at the source, because otherwise any other belief we try and change, it's like a hydra. You just you just cut off the head and then 2 other heads grow. What we want to do is we want to get to the root of the neck and chop off the entire body, which is this sort of I can't change belief that people have. So when mapping your meta-domain beliefs, I want you to use the beliefs and knowledge you had about it prior to this training. So obviously with the training now, if you're buying into what I'm telling you, which I'm hoping you are because it's the most important thing you can buy into, above anything like the Loom stuff or the YouTube stuff or the sales stuff, we're going to give you like the best tactics in the world for acquiring clients organically and paid and signing deals. But none of that matters if you can't address this meta belief, right? So I want you to, when you map out your beliefs around beliefs and the meta domain, I want you to use the beliefs and knowledge you had about it prior to this training. So I don't want you to use the knowledge you have now. I want you to use the knowledge you had before you had this. I know it's quite hard to bring that up, but it's important that you bring to light everything you believe to be true about personal change and beliefs. So what we're going to do is use this document template for belief mapping. So the first thing we're doing here is we're not worrying about what we want to believe. We're just going to be mapping out what we currently believe to be true. So what I want you to do is I want you to start with the meta domain of identity and beliefs, and then map out 2 other domains of your choosing. You can pick the ones that cause you the most pain, right? Appointment booking, for example. And then I want you to save the 3 individual documents as PDFs. So if you click here, it will take you through to a Google Doc, right? And this Google Doc is basically a way for you to list all of the perceived truth statements or domain-based and identity-based perceived truth statements you have about the domain in question. So what you're going to do is go File, make a copy, and what you're going to do is just delete this first part, and we're going to call this first document, right, meta beliefs map. And just remember the meta belief or the domain of meta beliefs is basically about beliefs themselves. So then what you do is you take the name of the domain, right, which could be anything, and we pop it in here, and then we're also going to pop it in here, and we're also going to pop it in here. We're going to delete the examples unless you want them. You might find them useful. So once you've got this here, you should do this 3 times. So then I'm also going to make a copy here, right? And this could be like appointment booking, right? Like this. Make a copy. Okay, and you could have another one for sales, for example, or objection handling, or whatever your issue is, whatever your big bottleneck is in business, whatever your big bottleneck is in life. You know, you can have one for fitness, you can have one for diet, you can have one specifically for bench press, you can have one specifically for oak trees. I don't care, well, I do care actually, don't do oak trees, but you know, you get my point. So once you've got this, you're going to go through and start by logging out your domain-based perceived truth statement. So your beliefs and the things you believe to be true about this thing here. Okay, it's very simple. All you've got to do is just start typing. Now, the key to this is to not inhibit your thinking. Okay, so you almost want to sort of just, at first glance, just let the thoughts just start bubbling up. Like when you think about, like, it's probably easy to do this with appointment booking, right? I'll be biased on this one. With appointment booking, like, you want to just start like thinking. So when you think appointment booking, the best thing to do is just to start writing words. So this obviously isn't how I perceive it, but you can be something like hard, difficult, ugly, painful, saturated, time-consuming, unsystemizable, unpredictable. You just want to start with adjectives, right? Because adjectives are obviously by their nature words we use to describe something, and generally, like, if you can just list all the adjectives that you have associated with the domain, then you're basically like, these adjectives will be what you believe to be true about it. So then off the back of the adjectives, you can just start to build out statements like appointment booking is hard, appointment booking is difficult. And then remember, this isn't about you specifically. We dive into the actual identity statements down here, but for the time being, you're just making observations about the thing specifically. So this is a hard thing to do, right? This is not easy, guys. I'm not just, saying this on a whim. Like, you don't necessarily need to fill out all of these, but generally speaking, you should be able to try and like keep going if you can. I've got so many of these documents. I'm not going to go into them because they're really personal, and there's stuff on there I'd rather not share, like about different things, like mental health and all this stuff and crap. But like, you just want to seriously ponder these. Now, for the sake of the exercise, you can go through it and just sort of blitz through and write down everything quickly. But the more you think about this, and the more you can get to the root, that real big like domain-based belief that is like destroying everything to do with appointment booking. Like, for example, if you're in the e-commerce niche, whether it's coaching or agency space, you might think e-commerce is a saturated niche. It's a very, very big, ugly, domain-based belief that's going to be really feeding into your identity, into your behavior, into your reality. So we want to root out the big boys first, the big statements. And the problem is they're not going to be very obvious. They kind of hide in plain sight. So if you want to know what they are, you have to start with the adjectives. You have to start maybe even just typing out like your perspective on the thing, and maybe any opinions you have to start catching your thoughts and stuff. And what happens now is, like, I've got a list of this just for general beliefs, and then I sort of log them in. And when I start having thoughts about something, I'll just note it and then just write it down. So that's the first thing, is do it with domain-based perceived truth statements, and then do it with identity. So domain is your observation of the thing itself. And don't worry, by the way, if these are ugly and if you don't like what you see. That's the point, right? Is to come to terms with and accept what we've built. And once you've done the domain-based beliefs, we then proceed to do it for the identity-based perceived truth statements. So this would then be like how you relate to, or how you integrate with or interact with the thing in question. So, if it's appointment booking, it could be like, I find appointment booking to be a struggle. I hate appointment booking. Appointment booking makes me feel nervous. Whenever someone says not interested, I feel really anxious. Like, we want to just try to, don't worry about differentiating too much between behavior and identity. Just anything that denotes like me, we, I, our, anything that denotes the self, and then the domain and how those two things are connected should be listed here. Negative or positive. If you're struggling with the thing, it's probably all negative. All you're going to see is negative information on here. That's absolutely fine. Don't worry about what you find. Just worry about finding it, right? So do that for all three things. So you want to do this for the meta beliefs map. You want to do it for the second thing and the third thing. You've got this, if I go back here, you've got this sort of resource in PDF form, right? So please do write down everything that you believe to be true about the meta domain, which is like the domain of beliefs. Please do that first, because if we can't crack that one, we can't crack anything, okay? And once you've done that, you can proceed to make another one for the other two things in question. And they should be the two things that are like basically most painful and, holding you back from achieving the goal the most. And you'll know what they are, because, well, you know what you want, and generally you want to sort of try and, like, if you're going to make amendments to your reality, you want to try and amend like what's most painful to begin with. So that's mapping out your current belief system, and get it done now, right? If you're still watching this video, please pause it and go and do it now. I know it takes time, but this is work, right? Like, you got to do it. If you're looking at this slide and you still haven't done it, analyze your behavior and take it back to the belief of something like, this doesn't work, or I don't need this. So if you're not doing this right now, it's because you've got this fucked up meta belief that you can't change. And the first thing we need to do to, like, the most important action to take towards self-transcendence is this. It's mapping out what you believe to be true about beliefs themselves. And if you're thinking that it's a stupid thing to do and you don't need to do it, then you're blind. You're cognitively, mentally, and perspectively, you're blind to like what can actually be done. And the reason you're blind to it is because your current identity and sense of self is rejecting something that threatens it. Okay? So please, and even if after I've told you still don't want to do it, the more resistance you feel towards doing something like this, the bigger your blind spot of like believing that you can't change. So for the love of God, if you're watching this and you haven't done it, pause the slides now. And if you continue without doing it and you don't get what you want, then I kind of can say I told you so, right? I won't say that out of pride, but I'll just say it out of like cause and effect. So get it done. Please, for the love of God, don't be an idiot and do the work. If there's a single action item to take on this program, this is the one. You should be done. Okay. So now that you've done that, right, and if you're still listening to my voice after 20 seconds, right, please go and do it. Not for my sake, because obviously care about you as a client, and like when you succeed, I succeed, but I've made this training, I put so much attention and time into it to help you get through this stuff, so make sure you've done it. Now look at your PDFs. And what you've just listed is the true root of all of your issues and suffering related to the domains you've listed. So if your reality is no appointments, no sales, no clients, no money, no nothing, no abundance, then what you can see in front of you right now, if the domains that you've picked are related to that suffering, that's the root of the cause. Print the PDFs out and look at them, stare at them, spend minutes, if not hours or days, reflecting on them and observing them. Because what you've just written out, right, on those PDFs, that's the thing that's holding you back. It's not like, remember at the start the last video, when we said it's never about like it's all our fault basically. This is what I mean by it's your fault. It's these beliefs that you directly have construed as a result of your experiences and faulty feedback loops. This is the thing. So look at the PDFs, and this is the single most important activity that I did that contributed towards my success in business. And it was to do with appointment booking and sales, because they were what I was struggling with. And I remember I got this piece of paper and this pen, and I wrote down everything I believed to be true about sales and appointment booking. And it was always like, appointment booking is hard, and appointment booking makes me nervous, and appointment booking is stressful, and appointment booking doesn't work, and people don't want to talk to me, and blah, blah, blah. And then I wrote those down and I looked at them and I was like, oh my God, that's it. It's so obvious now. It's literally in black and white. I can see exactly why I'm not succeeding. So by doing this, we define the problem. And everything leading up to this training until now has led to this moment of you defining what the problem is. Because 90% of problem solving is problem definition, right? By definition. So now you know why you're not succeeding. It's obvious. If you're held back, if you're suffering, if you're struggling, and your reality is that of suffering and struggle, then it is what is on those PDFs right now. Okay? So now we can see the enemy. We can see it. Now we've got something to actually attack. Because most people, when they think about mindset, they don't know what they're trying to beat. But now we've actually got something that we can use to wage war, because we know what we're up against. Okay? Now that we've mapped your belief system, we're going to see how this ties into the rest of your self-image, identity, and character. So now that you've understood your beliefs, we're going to be mapping your current self. And this is the part of the video where we start taking an objective view on yourself and you. So we're going to use the knowledge of your beliefs and some other things to map your current self out in visual form so you can see what you're up against. The key here is to be disgustingly honest with yourself. Right? This is the secret. Even if you are disgusted by what you find or who you are, and you really don't like it, and you hate yourself and you're angry with yourself, which is unfortunate but could be true, like, you need to be brutally honest with what you find it. There's no right and wrong. No one's going to see it. You've got to be honest. So let's hop into the Imperium self-mapping resource. So you're going to need to go to myro.com to create an account. I've got some instructions. But what we're going to do now is basically like map out your whole identity and yourself. And we're going to do it by, looking at the core beliefs you've just written out, but we're also going to do it by looking at some other things as well. The reason we're doing this is so, like I said, we know who we're up against. Because, like I said at the beginning, success is basically just the result of winning a war against yourself. Really, in business, it's not you against your competitors, it's not you against your market, it's not you against anything, it's you against yourself. And you need to know who you need to defeat and how, because if you don't know them, you can't defeat them, right? Most people don't even know it exists, so they don't try. But let's hop into this. So we've already been through mapping your current belief system here. So now what we're going to do is go into this resource, which is mapping your current self. Okay? So this is where it gets kind of cool, because this is where we can actually start making an intangible perspective of identity to something that's tangible and actually attackable, right? Or digestible. So mapping your current self. This will be in the resources section. Success is simply just winning a war between who you need to become to achieve your goal and who you are, right? So if we go all the way back here, if we go all the way back to when we were thinking about the little, what would we call it, oscillation, right? This oscillation here is basically just the fluctuation between two versions of yourself. And the ceiling is you becoming the person you need to become to achieve the goal. And then the floor is like who you were and who you want to, you don't really want to sustain it, but like this is who you basically are and this is who you want to become. And these two things are basically in conflict, if that makes sense. And so what we're trying to do with this training is basically try and break through this pattern and manifest different things. So this is what the war looks like, right? In visual, sort of almost statistical form, when we wage this war with ourselves, this is how it manifests. This is how the behavior fluctuates, and this is the result that we see and achieve. And this creates a lot of pain. So we need to start by mapping out the current self, which basically creates the floor. So we want to, as we said, flip the floor, and we want to turn this thing on its head so we can make our current ceiling our new floor. And to do that, we need to understand who is putting the floor there, which is us, and that's our reality. So step number one is create a Miro account here. So if you click on this, it will take you through to Miro. Miro is a whiteboard software. It's free to use. You can just create an account. We're mapping this out in visual form, so we need something visual to use it. Okay, so I just made an amendment to this document because I realized that I had made a mistake, but we're back. So what you want to do now is basically create the account in Miro and then copy this link, and we'll hop into Safari and paste. You can do this in Chrome, it doesn't really matter. Once done, what will happen is you won't have access to this yet. What you'll have to do is put the password Imperium with a capital I, and then once it loads, you'll have to click a little button at the bottom to accept it into your board or into your dashboard. Once you've accepted it, you'll have access to this, but you will not be able to edit this, right? So what you need to do is click the logo in the top left, go to boards, and find Imperium current self mapping, duplicate. And you can name this like copy of, or put your name and click copy. And it will duplicate for a second here. And once done, we can then zoom out and we have an editable board that we can move around. So now that you've got this board, it's time to actually start really mapping everything out. So let me introduce you to the current self-mapping board. This is really important because, well, this is how we visualize the enemy, right? And this is how we can get to know what we're up against. So we have our beliefs. So this is what we've done here. We've got beliefs, which is a statement of truth about a domain of reality or your relationship with that domain. And this is split into your 6 documents that you should have produced. Well, you produced 3 documents, but 6 pages. So up here we have your current belief mapping for your domain-based beliefs. And then here we have your current identity-based perceived truth statements and mapping, belief mapping based on your identity of the domain association, right? So you should have one for your meta belief, right, for the belief about beliefs, and you should also have one for identity-based perceived truth statements around the belief about beliefs. That sounds a bit complicated, but we've done that, so you know what that means. Then you've obviously got your other 2. So the first thing to do is insert these. We'll do that in a second. What we also have is your oscillations. So you have more than 3 oscillations, and you have way more than 3 belief systems. But for now, we just want to focus on the areas and the domains that are really giving you the most stick and the most difficulty. There's really only just usually 1 or 2 things to fix. And then once you fix those 1 or 2 things, it becomes something else. Service, appointment, booking, and sales, we can fix those and build a character that makes them easy. But then you'll run into the issue of scalability, service delivery, and relationships and hiring and management and stuff as you sign new clients. And once you run into those problems, you then come back to this board and then you map yourself out again and you tick off the 2 things that you've already completed and basically built. It's kind of like just building a video game character, really. What's going to happen is you're going to level up to the point where you can defeat the bosses that are currently within your level range. But then as soon as you defeat the bosses within your level range, there's another boss that comes along that you have to defeat to progress. It's the same thing in business. We just solve what's in front of us, and then problems basically create, solutions create problems. We never ever stop solving problems or improving. So we also have oscillations, right? So beliefs over here, then oscillations, which is your ceilings, floors, and averages for certain areas of your life. And what you want to do is pick the 3 biggest bottlenecks for you, for your personality, for where you are, and map your oscillations. So we've already done this, right, for multiple things. So ideally, you want to pick the 2 that you pick here should be related to the 2 that you pick here. And then maybe you've just got a 3rd one that you want to put. Maybe you want to make it your meta belief, but you should map your 3 most important oscillations. Then you have your leverageable skills, which is your ability to do something practical so well that it contributes to the accomplishment of your goal. So maybe you've got a skill of lead sourcing or making YouTube thumbnails or cooking or cleaning or anything, right? Whatever you're skilled at and being good at doing, you can write in here, okay? you might be great at sales. You might be great at asking questions on sales calls, but not so good at objection handling. So you just want to write down all of the skills. There might be more than 10. So if there's more than 10, you can just drag it out and just keep adding numbers here. But you want to note down all the current skills and practical things that you can do that would contribute to your goal. We then have habits, right? Which is an action that you repeatedly take that does not require willpower. This is automated, repeated behavior. So if you meditate, but you only meditate for, 5 days a month, that is not a habit, right? It's something that you do basically every day. So you want to write down all of your good habits. And if there's more than 10, then you can extend this, obviously, and keep going. And you want to write down all your bad habits. So, we're not just focusing on what we're doing right, we're focusing on what we're doing wrong, and make sure you write them all down. If you know you've got like something nasty here that you don't want to bring to your attention, like a porn addiction or a drinking problem, then put it in here, man, because this requires brutal honesty, okay? Remember, what we're doing is we're trying to bring to light like the unconscious, and we're trying to like make the intangible enemy tangible and attackable. So we need to, no matter how much pain it causes you to write down your bad sides and your lack of skills and your flaws and your ceilings and your beliefs, that you'll feel good about writing down your good habits, but you won't feel so good about your bad ones. But it's important that you put up with that pain. And then character traits, a quality you possess, either positive or negative, depending on whether it contributes to your goal. So like to me personally, character traits are only positive or negative if they contribute to the goal or not. So, for example, you could say that, like, to someone, like, to the average person, like, disagreeableness is a negative personality trait because, well, like, in society, people who are disagreeable tend to be a bit, like, they're a bit dickish, right? They're not very nice. They're a bit rude. But in business, you kind of have to be disagreeable. So I perceive disagreeableness to be a good trait. Traits are only good or bad depending upon what they help us accomplish, right? So what you want to do is you want to write down all of your positive character traits and all of your negative character traits. All of them. Focus on the negative if you can, right? Because these are the ones that are going to hold you back. And if you want to find out what your traits are, then you can ask your friends or family members to get a more accurate view. Don't put what you want to be, put what you are. This is the key, right? This is the key to the whole thing, right? We're mapping out who we have been for a long time. Now that you've done this training and you're aware that you can change, you will have the temptation to put in like an over-optimistic perception of who you currently are because of the paradigm shifts you've had in the last week or so. It's really important that we don't pay attention to what's happened in the last week, but instead we pay attention to what's happened in the last years or, even perhaps decades of pain and frustration. So it's just super important. Something that I wanted to just sort of note here. I just made that mistake. I'll just leave that as that, fuck it. You just want to make sure that you're logging everything, right? Not just who you want to be, but who you are. It's going to annoy me here because I've got the wrong color scheme. We're just going to sort of drag that to there. That's better. Okay. So write that out. And then I've also got this little resource, this Google Doc for you. So if you can't think of the traits, right, there's actually 630 of them in this Google Doc. I took the time. I didn't write all these out myself, don't worry, but I have found some resources and compiled them. But what you want to do is read through all the positive traits. So these like, once again, like, it's not positive or negative because, like, I bet you I can find a negative trait that actually would contribute towards business success. So let me go down to negative here. So let's have a look here. So look, they're negative traits, right? Blunt, right? Assertive, artificial, callous, calculating, brittle, right? Cautious. You can even say childish. Sometimes is a good business trait to have. That's probably a story for another day. But like, if you're on a sales call, you want to make someone laugh. It can be helpful to not be too serious. But like critical, crude maybe not so much, but like delicate. There's like what is perceived negative. You want to just read these traits as like they are, and then look at your goal and see if they help you achieve it or not. Because generally speaking, like people have it all backwards. So just take the sentiment of the adjective with a pinch of salt, right? But if you're struggling to figure out what your traits are because you've got too many blind spots, which you will have because the ego wants to have them, then just read through these and then just figure out which ones resonate with you. Here's one, for example, just caught my eye. Protein, the ability to change, right? God knows I'm writing that one down. But right now you haven't got this. right? Because if all this training is like brand new to you, then well, you haven't got this trait. You might now be aware that it exists and you want to have it, but as of yet you haven't developed it, because developing traits does take time. You don't just decide and that's it. You have to decide and then keep deciding until it confirms an identity. So so that's the map. And you want to spend, a good amount of time, like a good hour or so, just going through all of this. You can drag your belief PDFs in here into these little frames, so that way you can, see it. You can drag your oscillations into here, or you can just sort of like actually edit these, right, like this. I maps it out so you can just, pop it in here. Log your skills, log your bad habits, log your good habits, log your negative and your positive character traits, and that's you. Right, and once you've done this, you can look at like where you are. Right, it's a very, very good skill to have, and it's a very nice thing to do, because this is the cause of all your suffering, my friend. This is the cause of all the pain and the difficulty. It's really all this. And like, I've got one of these for myself at the moment. I've had one of these for myself for basically like the last few years. Once I realized I could start doing this. So yeah, just go through this now. Pause the video. Log everything out, and it will just give you like a real strong peace of mind. And we're going to be doing this in a bit for who you're evolving into, and you'll see how powerful this stuff is when you can see them sort of side by side. So that's the self-mapping process, okay? And once you've done that, we can move on to the next part of the video, which I have dubbed Darwin and Jung's ideological offspring. So Charles Darwin, obviously the guy who came up with, well, I wouldn't say came up with, but in other words, discovered natural selection. And Jung was one of my favourite intellectual role models, to be honest. The dude went some dark places, but he was the father of a lot of modern day clinical psychological practices, founder of shadow work, etc., etc. But Jung, he died in 1961. He was an awesome guy, and I strongly suggest you study him. Pretty much, well, the majority of this understanding I have has sprung from Jung. So yeah, that's the source. But yeah, so if Darwin and Jung had a baby, what would happen? Well, I don't mean physically, because I don't think it's really possible for them to have genetic offspring, but they can have ideological offspring, and that's what we're going to be covering. That you should know by now, right? Having listened to me rant about this stuff for nearly what's probably close to 8 hours, right? Like, you should know what I mean when I say there's no chance of you achieving your goal. Right? Remember, who you are right now in your current state, you do not have what is required to achieve your goal. Looking at the map you just created of yourself, do you really think that you in your current state of self, with those habits and skills and traits and beliefs and oscillations, do you think you have any chance? The answer is no. Because if you had the habits and the traits and the oscillations and the beliefs and the skills required to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, then you would have accomplished it. And because you haven't got what you want, then you're not the person that can. Probably not. You probably can't do it. But that's okay. We know from the last video that while most people submit to self-solidification and don't believe they can change, we actually, with a heightened sense of awareness, can change. And I'm telling you that it's entirely possible to change, right? Let me introduce you to the evolving self, right? This is the key. This is what we've all been sort of leading up to now. And what we're going to be doing now is basically proceeding to define a self and a character for you that can easily achieve and accomplish the dream life that you want. And this evolving self will basically have a floor that is your current ceiling, right? So we're going to be setting standards, and we're going to create a self that, like, we want your beliefs and your oscillations, skills, traits, habits, all that. We want all of those things to create standards that are so high that you couldn't tolerate anything less than your goal. And, when you become someone that is, well, that can easily accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, then it kind of just happens, and anything that isn't that would be intolerable to the person. It'd just be like not brushing their teeth. And so what we're going to do in this video is map out the evolving self and explain it to you and how to create it and visualize it. And then there's a few more mindset videos that we have to cover. There's some more stuff to learn around pain, around paradoxes, and some other things. And then towards the end of the mindset module, we're actually going to be tying all of your understanding together so we can actually design a reality that you can actually start to put this into motion and become this person. So we're solving this problem step by step by defining who you are, defining who you need to be. Before we could do that, obviously, we needed to understand everything up until this point. It's why it's taken so long for me to put this video together and all these modules together, because the knowledge has to sort of stack from bottom up, and figuring out the right sort of approach and figuring out how to structure the videos and structure the points and the things we've covered and the resources, that's what's been the real ball ache, right? It's not explaining it, it's putting it together that in a cohesive manner that builds on itself. And so Evolving Self, we're going to be going through and walking you through how to visualize the person that can. We're going to then have a few more videos around different things to do with pain, reflections, and extra pieces of knowledge that help you act and basically fix your thinking. And then towards the end, we will actually start to talk about how to manifest the evolving self, okay? So who you are is not who you have to be. Change is possible. It's entirely possible and actually quite easy to undergo complete psychological overhaul, rewiring your relationship with the world and completely shifting your reality. And believe me, as someone who's done it, it's fucking possible. And it's amazing. And it's the best feeling in the world, okay? Like, it's almost as if reality is like, it's like, you know, you can sort of like push it and it moves. Like you can take the fabrics of reality and you can sort of just play around with them, and then you can just like let go of it and it's something completely different. Like when you understand how this stuff works, you can take your life and you can just sort of exert force on it in a certain direction and it will move in that direction. It's the most beautiful thing, and it's the most important skill to develop, and it's the most rewarding thing possible. And being able to share it with you on a video like this and have you go through the same like process of development of cognitive awareness that I've been able to go through, nothing brings me more like joy and knowing that I can teach you this, because it's so much fun, okay? The self does not exist. It's just you holding on to a collection of abstract, intangible narratives and stories of the past that have no critical underpinning and no real basis in truth. Psychologists knew this, Jung knew this, but in the last couple of 100 years, like the message has got lost. So people like Jung and some other psychologists, they were onto this and they knew that this was how the self worked. But as we've progressed through, you know, the 21st century, the nature of the ego and stuff, and everything's developed, we've really lost this knowledge, and it's really tragic. But the self, it doesn't exist. You can't point to it. It's a collection. It's an aggregate of intangible beliefs that don't really have any connection to objective reality or any connection to a reality that you want to achieve, but you just for some fucking reason accept them. It's time to stop accepting them. Imagine yourself as wet clay, right? Yourself. I don't mean yourself. I mean you're not your physical body, but imagine your self, that sort of aggregation of beliefs as wet clay. It can be remolded into anything. It can be shaped into anything you want. All you have to do is you have to be willing to crush what you have mistakenly built by accident and without realizing it, so you can rebuild. So yourself, who you are, your identity, your visualization of reality, it's like wet clay, but right now it's dry, right? And you've pieced this thing together. It's probably all over the place with no real affinity to what you really want or what you subconsciously desire as per your dry vacuums. You need to have the ability and the gut and the drive to just take a hammer to that thing, pour water all over it, make it malleable again, and start to rebuild it and shape it as you see fit. It takes courage to do that. You have to lose yourself. You have to be willing to let go of who you are. You have to be willing to destroy and rebuild the ugly, malformed, accidental, mistaken sense of identity that you've clinged on to. Because right now you're emotionally attached to it for no reason except from the fact that it's all you've ever known. And anything that isn't that can inspire some fear, but it's so important that you remember that you can change and that all you have to do is be willing to let go of it. And, accept that who you are right now is a result of your own blind accidents. Every belief, every shred of identity, it's all you're doing and your fault. It was all you. And equipped with this knowledge, knowing it's on you, with conscious effort, we can begin to reshape and remold who you are into someone capable. And I'll put it simply, it's time to become and evolve into he or she who can. Right? It's time to achieve a self, an identity, and a character that can easily achieve your goal and evolve into him or her. So we don't the self. It doesn't. There's nothing there, right? It's kind of just this messy, arbitrary manifest of experiences that have happened to us that we paid no attention to and just pushed under the rug, and now we're sort of living this reality we don't want to live. You just have to let go of it, man. Just crush it, be gone with it, and start building it back up from the ground up. It's not about who you are, it's always about who you're evolving into. Everywhere, every day, someone's like, we go through life like, who am I? Is this thing like me? Is this thing not with me? Like, we need to let go of that mindset, because now the only thing that you are is who you are evolving into. And the truth is that you're never really anything at all. It's always just what you're evolving to become. Okay? And that's the secret here, because you can evolve, and then if you evolve, then that evolution and that happens, and that's it, and then you're static, and that's just self-solidification all over again. And you'll go through the same pain. So you need to sort of come to terms with the fact that if you want to continue to have growth in your life, and if you want to continue to grow as an individual and as a person, as a business owner, as anyone, as a father, as a husband, as a woman, as a wife, whatever it might be, as a mother, you need to consistently be willing to let go of who you are and build an evolving self and grow into that person that accomplishes the outcome or reality that you want to achieve. You've got to do it. You don't have to. This is not mandatory, right? But trust me, it's much more fun than just sitting around. And this is the evolving self. And if you ask yourself, while you in your current state don't stand a chance of achieving your goal, well, who does? What habits and skills and traits and beliefs and oscillations and sense of self would someone who can have? So think about your goal. Because I'll tell you now that if you want like 7 figures, multi-7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures, even 6 figures, like that shit's possible because it's been done thousands, hundreds of thousands of times before, millions of times before, right? Certain levels. So we know it's possible, so who can? Well, let's get to figuring that out. We need to start mapping the evolving self. So we need to go from, like, we've now mapped out the current self. So we know like who you are and what you're capable of, which isn't much apparently, which is fine, right? And if your ego's attached to that, then just let go of it, because now we're going to start building someone that can. Let's get to figuring it out. So I've got this this resource, Mapping Your Evolving Self. Okay. And what we're going to start by doing again is mapping your evolving belief system. So I've got 2 resources here. We've got Mapping Your Evolving Self and Mapping Your Evolving Belief System. So the first thing we want to do is we want to map out your belief systems, as we have done before for your current belief systems. So this is the simple part. It's time to look at all the belief maps you made earlier and basically flip them on their head. So every belief you basically have written, right, on this and in this document here, you know, in this current belief map, every belief you've written, you want to go ahead and invert and write the opposite, right? So all you have to do here, if you want to figure out like what you need to believe to be true, you just have to look at what you currently believe, which is holding you back, and just believe the complete opposite thing. So you can click on this and you can just basically, once again, make a copy, and you're going to want to make 3 copies, one for your beliefs around beliefs, right? The meta belief, and then 2 other copies for the 2 other domains. And then all you have to do here is literally just like, this is the easy part, because all you have to do is pull this up in one thing here, and then pull up all the negative beliefs that you wrote about earlier for each sheet. Look at the negative beliefs, and then basically just write the exact opposite here. And generally speaking, like, all you have to do is invert the thing. So if you've got a belief that appointment booking is hard, then you just change it to appointment booking is easy. Or if one of the identity-based beliefs for appointment booking is appointment booking terrifies me, then you basically change that to like appointment booking is the most exciting thing I can possibly do. Or if it's like objections and you're like, sales objections are like impossible to overcome, then it's like sales objections can easily be overcome pretty much every single time. Or if it's like, I think that I'm not a pushy person, then it's like, I have no problem pushing people if I think it's within their best interest. So you see, this is the easy part. All you have to do is just write the opposite. So go ahead and just pause the video and do that now. It's pretty simple. You just open this, create 3 things, one for meta belief, and then just go ahead and write the opposites. Okay, then what we want to do, once you've done that and have that in your desktop, is open the next resource, which is Mapping Your Evolving Self. This is basically just like the same thing as we did a second ago, but we're going to be mapping out who you need to become, right? So now it's time to map out he or she who can achieve your dreams. And you should have a Miro login from earlier in the video. So just follow the same process, and get the following board into your dashboard. So here's the Miro link. If you click on this one, the password is Imperium once again. You'll have to obviously duplicate this one into your Miro account, just as you did before. So you can basically just go back to Miro, duplicate it, accept it in, and then you can make a copy. This is exactly the same sheet. I've removed the bad traits and the bad habits because, well, we don't really want to like put anything bad on, that's going to hinder us from achieving our goal in terms of evolution. By nature, we're still going to have bad habits and character traits when we get to the goal, but the point is we don't really want to focus on acquiring them. We want to focus on removing them, right? But so it's pretty cool, very simple. If you just like hop back into here, you can go ahead and like what you want to do now is kind of just think about the goal and then think about the person that you need to become to achieve the goal. Now, if you are not sure and you're not sure what to put into these pieces, then just go and find people that have achieved the goal and ask them, or find people on YouTube that have achieved the goal and ask them. Like I can tell you, like if you want to achieve like a 7-figure income, you kind of need to have like the skill of sales, the skill of appointment booking, of hiring, etc. But you really need to critically think through here, like who, because it's at the end of the day, it's about who you're evolving into. And you don't necessarily want to evolve into me, right? Or anyone. You want to evolve into your own person and you want to create your own reality. I can't really do this for you. It's also why I'm not giving you any examples. I've been very sort of constrained and restricted in terms of examples because I don't want to skew your hypotheses or, methodologies of evolution. I'd rather just sort of give you the framework. So what you want to do is just go in, you can extend the traits out, you can send the habits out, you can extend the skills out, you can rewrite your oscillation so that you have the new floor. This is the big one, right? The floor, the new floor that you're going to have, the new ceiling you're going to have. If your goal is to make 10 grand a month, then you want the floor to be 10 grand a month, right? Like the person that you're becoming will not accept anything less than the goal, right? And then the ceiling could be like 50 grand a month or something. This is entirely up to you, and it really is just a testament to who you are becoming and who you're evolving into. And then once you've done this and once you've got this, you then you've got a good idea as to what you're up against and who you need to become to achieve your goal. And this just makes the whole thing so much more tangible. And then what you can do is you can print out both of them if you want to, and every day you can just look at who you're destroying and look at who you are evolving into. Because by evolving into this person, we are by nature destroying the person that we are. And you have to be okay with that. Now, I don't mean destroying you're not going to change religion. You're not going to, you're not going to change who your parents are. I'm not asking you to divorce anyone or go and lose any friends. I'm just sort of saying that something's got to give, and certain beliefs and certain realities and domain-based beliefs and oscillations and standards and habits and traits that you have, you just can't have them. You have to decide between the goal and the ego, right? So who you are is not capable of achieving your goal for certain reasons that we've just mapped out. You have to be willing to sacrifice yourself for the goal. And in doing so, we kind of evolve into someone that can. So that's the premise of this video. When we move towards the end of the mindset training, we'll be reverting back to these resources so that we can actually start to build affirmations and a concrete SOP that you can follow daily to actually grow into this person and start to have your beliefs sort of compound and cascade so you can begin to change your reality. But the purpose of the last video and this one was just basically to shift your paradigm and bring your attention towards this and how it works. And I hope I've done a good job of articulating it. It's taken me years of work to be able to, it really has taken me I'd say maybe 4 or 5 years of research and understanding this, God knows how many books, hundreds of books. It's taken me years and years, probably 4 years, 5 years to produce a 3-hour training video. So what I've learned in 5 years of intensive research, and this, I never researched this so I could teach it. I always researched it so I could understand it and, build it into my own character, because I always saw it being the biggest problem. But you're consuming 5 years of knowledge in 3 hours. And in doing so, don't expect to absorb it all immediately. You're going to have to go back and rewatch these videos. And anytime you find yourself bouncing between a ceiling and a floor that you're not happy with, just come back to this video and just rewatch it and remind yourself. Because right now you might feel a bit pumped, you might feel pretty cool, You might be like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to evolve. I'm going to become someone else. I can see who I need to become. I can see what I need to get rid of. Amazing. But you will forget this stuff, right? It won't, you have to consistently remind and refresh yourself until over like, you know, a few years of conditioning, this will eventually become your paradigm. And you will then just be able to like sort of like snap your fingers and just evolve. It's just like, kind of just like Pokemon, right? Although I don't like Pokemon because they sort of cap out how quickly you can evolve and like how like it takes a certain amount of days and then you can only become what you can become and that's it. Like there's still a cap there, but you get my point. Like we're just having to become a different beast, and it really is the key. If you want to achieve what you want to achieve, you have to become he or she who can. No, there's no other way. It's the easiest, quickest, and really the only route to success and to achieving a reality that is significantly less painful and exponentially more rewarding than the one that you have right now. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful, and I will look forward to seeing you in the further mindset videos. Make sure you've taken all the action items, and thanks for watching. Have a good day. Take care.